to the September 11th, 2019 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Haywood, would you please call roll?
Chairperson Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Boyle.
Here.
Commissioner Cahill. Commissioner Downs.
Here.
Commissioner Sell. Commissioner Sullivan.
Here. Commissioner
Watson.
Here.
Commissioner Williams. And Commissioner Wolf. We have a quorum.
Thank you. You have in front of you a copy of the agenda for this evening's meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve that agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Downs and seconded by Vice Chair Boyle. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? That motion carries. You also had in your packets a copy of the minutes of the August 28th, 2019 meeting of this commission. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
That's been moved by Commissioner Downs and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries as well. It moves us on to item 2A, committee reports, beginning with the Form-Based Code Committee. I am the only member of that committee who is in attendance this evening, but I can report that we have not met since the last meeting of the commission, of the Planning Commission. That was on August 23rd. Our next meeting is planned for next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. That's September 18th. And as you know, we have, I'll say tentative, but they're effectively in place, work sessions planned for to discuss, for the entire commission to discuss the form-based code on September 18th, October 16th, and October 30th, all at 5:30 in this courtroom. Any questions? Okay, then we'll move on to item 2B, the Hannah Community Center Study Committee. According to my notes, you may have met on 2 days ago?
We did. We met on Monday and continued to review ideas regarding the use, maintenance, and development of the Hannah Community Center. We had information that was provided from a survey done of users, sort of an ad hoc survey that was done of users that was very interesting. And we are moving towards getting the report done, and in light of that, we are going to have our next meeting begin at 5:30, which is scheduled for September the 23rd, I believe, and spend a little longer working so that we can move on and doing our report to council.
Terrific. Any questions for Vice Chair Boyle or Commissioner Downs regarding the work of that committee? Yeah, thank you for your time. I would note that Commissioner Cahill has arrived about 7:04.
I apologize. Parking problems.
No worries.
Parking meter problems also.
It's fine.
You made a minute.
He is currently in attendance. That'll move us on to item 3. If there are no questions for that committee, that'll move us on to item 3, staff reports. Mr. Haywood?
Just real quick, last night the City Council acted to deny Ordinance 1458, which is the rezoning for the Evergreen properties. That's all I have.
Okay, terrific. Questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, then that'll move us on to item 4, Commissioner announcements. And then item 5, communications from citizens. We'll begin with oral communications. This is the time in our meeting when we invite members of the public to come forward and discuss any matter that may be either is on our agenda or may not be on our agenda. We have several public hearings tonight, and if your intention is to speak on any one of those, we generally ask that you wait until that item comes up on the agenda in order to, before you come forward to speak. We do have one item of old business, and that's a site plan and special use permit for the properties at 710, 722, and 722.5 Grove Street. I'll also note that that property is on our agenda earlier in regards to a zoning change, and so there'll actually be an opportunity during the meeting to talk about that if you want to talk specifically about the zoning change, but if your intention is to talk more about the special use permit or site plan, I would invite you to come forward now. Okay, so seeing no one come forward, again, understood that you'll have that opportunity to talk about that project in a few minutes. We did not receive any written communications regarding anything that was not on our agenda, so that will move us on to item, oh goodness, 6A, public hearings, and I find them on the wrong page on my tablet here. So I will just use the analog method and say this is a site plan and special use permit. This is a public hearing which will be held to consider a site plan and special use permit application from Core Campus Manager LLC for the properties at 131, 135, 207, 217, and 227 Bogue to demolish all of the existing buildings on the site and construct a 14-story, 720-unit multifamily development in 2 separate buildings, each at 152 feet tall, including amenities for the residents and structured parking for 400 vehicles. The development proposes a mix of apartment types ranging from efficiencies to 4-bed units, including row houses. Ms. Schmidt.
Thank you. Get my voice back here. The 2 buildings are located on Bogue Street, near the corner of Grand River and Bogue. The parking is provided as 1 level of surface parking on both buildings, 1 underground level on both buildings, and 1 mezzanine level on both buildings. Between both buildings, there are 400 parking spaces. As you can see here, it shows the mezzanine level and the underground parking. Whoops, sorry about the jumpy. The different floor plans, you can see the configurations throughout the building. It does show a variety of different floor plans for tenants. This, based on what the applicant has stated, provides for a variety of income or levels for the students. The amenity package includes a rooftop pool and hot tub on both buildings. It also includes barbecue areas. The building includes not only 1-level apartments, but it includes 5 row house units on both buildings, 2-story row house buildings. The amenity package also includes, for certain units, amenity units that walk out onto a patio and an interior garden area. The project includes about 1,773 beds according to the chart that I have in your packet. The packet has been broken down into showing which type of units, and then it shows how many occupancy per unit, how many units, how many total occupancy per unit, and then it goes into how many required parking per unit type, and then it talks about the number of units, and then it tells what the parking requirement would be per our parking code. So if this were a straight, if the council chooses to go by our straight parking code, it would require 840 parking spaces for the south building, 592 parking spaces for the north building. The project provides 400 parking spaces for approximately 1,773 beds. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Downs?
How many stories is that apartment? It's
14 stories.
no, between the 2 towers. There's an existing apartment building?
I believe that is a 3-story, but it should say on this. Let's see. I would have to check, but I believe it's 3 stories. But I'd have to verify that for you to be certain.
At any rate, it's going to be dwarfed by these.
Yes.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Cahill?
With regard to the amount of parking for this development, and I know we've had a very short time period since it opened, but I'm wondering how it's worked in their current building, which had a very low number of parking spaces.
That's a good question, and we have to do a little more exploration on that. We have had quite a few requests for permits in the Charles and Division Street parking ramp. However, we've stopped selling permits in those 2 ramps because we have to save parking for the general public. So there are no more permits in those 2 parking garages. So any other parking available would have to be on campus. So we won't know how many campus parking spaces have been utilized by this development.
We have reason to believe that that our parking ramp filled up because of this development?
Our parking ramp wouldn't have filled up necessarily, but they would have made a certain number of parking permits available for anyone that came along. But I do believe that they felt that most of them were from the hub and those 2 garages. But I
If I can
don't,
continue.
Yes, yeah.
but I don't know that they actually
hand.
have documentation
stop
to tell, like they just know because people have told them they live in the hub. But I don't know that they have documentation saying that's, you know, other than they should have the addresses to where they live, so.
Okay. On the way here, I drove through the alley and everything, and I was curious how the traffic is flowing from the parking they have in the current development. When I got there tonight, it was torn up because there's some sort of utility work or something going on in the alley. Do we have any read on what the experience has been, traffic patterns, in and out, and that type of thing?
Not yet.
Okay.
But we do, I think you saw in the report, the existing alley right now is only a little over 15 feet, which is really too narrow for two-way traffic. And I'm sure this will probably come out in the traffic study because the city engineer had made comment that he would recommend that it be a one-way traffic going down the alley
Right.
because it's not big enough for two-way.
And that was my concern, but it was actually the alley,
Going
the
east to
other
west.
alley.
Right.
that was blocked off when I went there tonight.
Right.
And I had to go back down.
Hopefully that's temporary.
Okay.
Vice Chair?
My question was, how does the parking that they are proposing for these 2 buildings compare to the parking that was finally approved for the hub?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I can get that
Thank you,
comparison.
that would be really helpful to me.
Do you mean in terms of occupant per car or
Exactly,
something like that?
because it went through the planning process and council approved something, so I'm wondering how what they're proposing here compares to what was finally approved for the hub.
Other questions from Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Cahill?
The police department said there should be a detailed security plan for the common areas,
Yes.
for courtyards and parking areas in the pool. Have there been any issues at the current development to this point?
There were issues the first gathering they had on the roof, yes. And so, yes, there had some concerns there.
Have those been addressed or they subsided or?
There has been some conversation with the property owners and the police, and they're working together to make sure that that does not happen again.
Okay.
Keep going, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
The building department, I think it was, Mr. Stover talked about having command rooms, fire command rooms in both
Correct.
buildings. Do we have those in the current building?
No, they do not have them in the current building. There is space to have them in the current building, in the front areas of both buildings. When we looked at the plan, he would be comfortable with them being in the front lobby of both buildings. Whoops. And these areas here, and one over here. So there is area to put those command centers, but they're not in there yet.
Okay, and the name may be sort of self-descriptive, but when we're talking about a fire command room, what are we talking about?
I'm not certain what all would be in there, and we can get that description from the fire marshal.
Other questions? That's fine, I've got a couple myself. We can see that the project's located on 2 different parcels, but it's really, we're treating it like one project, and that's not.
Correct.
That's not unheard of. The property, the Abbott and Graduate Hotel. I'm just curious if there's any net gain or loss to the city by treating this as one project as opposed to two. Curious.
Not necessarily.
Okay. And it indicates that there are several four-bedroom units that are indicated for this particular development. Now, I know that the last, and you're well aware of it, that when we took a look at the revisions to the East Village ordinance, that wasn't actually one of the things that this body had recommended for city
Right.
council, and they've not weighed in on that yet?
Right. And as you know, there's several things that this plan is not in compliance
fine.
with, and we tried to highlight those as much as we could.
Sure.
So they would have to either have the code changed or be in compliance.
Okay. I've a couple of other, like vehicle chargers, these things. The width of the sidewalk doesn't meet what would be expected or currently expected in the
Right.
ordinance. Some of the materials that are currently part of the, all right, so that's, I guess that's just a quick summary of the things that I saw that ultimately council's got to weigh in on before we get much further. I'm also noting that there's not we're missing the traffic study and that we're not likely to see that until October.
Correct.
And actually, I think that that's one of those things where ultimately we got to pull the trigger on this and say we're moving forward with it or not, or we're going to present it to this commission. To my way of thinking that, and this is no reflection on what, this will probably be more of a question for the applicant, but, given that we're looking at potentially a one-way, too narrow alley and that this particular project is significantly underparked, I think that's something that we'd want to see sooner rather than later. And I guess we see it when we see it, and then ultimately the Transportation Commission sees it when they see it.
Right.
But then in this case, it seems to me that would be something that would be of great benefit for this body to see, so that we can see ultimately what the impact of that, I'll say not enough, but I'll say that it's underparked, as we well know, and that the sort of
Right.
access to those parking spaces is going to be pinched. That
Right.
ultimately that'll play itself out, I suppose, in the traffic report. I've got a couple more notes here. I guess those are more for the applicant then. Any other questions for Ms. Schmidt? Commissioner Cahill?
Just one quick one. Engineering noted that the alley shown between lots 7 and 9 is vacated and is shown as dedicated to the adjoining property owners.
Right.
Do I understand that to mean, I'm assuming the alley belonged to the city. Did we give up control of it at some point?
This driveway right here, on the applicant's survey, they had it shown as an alley. They've corrected that on their site plan, so it's only shown as a driveway now. We just wanted to make sure that they were fully aware that it was vacated and it's a driveway and not an alley, so that they were not counting
Okay.
on this as being accessed.
So it wasn't referring to the alley behind?
No, it wasn't
Okay.
referring to the alley over here. It was referring to the driveway here.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Other questions for Ms. Schmidt? Okay, stick
Okay.
close, we'll probably come back to you. I thought I saw the applicant is here. The applicants are here. If you've got something you'd like to add, we'd like to invite you forward.
Good evening, David Pearson, on behalf of the applicant, and as lawyers like to say, just a few things. I guess to try and start at the top, first with respect to the phasing and the timing, and it's 2 buildings. So to address that right up front, the reason for these to be presented this way is they're under a single purchase agreement from co-owners. So as a result, we don't really have any choice but to apply for and discover whether in fact CORE can build anything there on both parcels.
Sorry, so there's the 2 different lots that are being purchased are owned by 2 different people, yes?
No, they're owned by related
Okay, I
owners.
misunderstood that.
And so there's a single purchase agreement for all of the property, so we have to find out whether we can build on all of it. The current phasing calls for so the north building is started first, and the second building starts 8 months after the first building is started. So there's not a lapse between the two, but they're not both being constructed at the exact same time. The one is following the other.
Sure.
But that's the reason why the two need to come in together. Part of the issue, I'll come back to that. The other issue on timing with respect to the traffic study is we put together the application and we're applying, and engineering and public works said, but you've got to have traffic counts after the hub opens and after school starts. And that's the reason for the delay in completing the traffic study. So those counts have been done. The analysis is currently underway. It will get to your consultants, DLZ, for review in time for it to go to the Transportation Commission on October 7th. So what that means is the earliest that the Planning Commission could take action under the ordinance, once it has the report from the Transportation Commission, would be at your meeting on October 9th, not before then. So we're sorry for the disconnect, but it's one of those things where you're not sure everything you need before you get there. So that's part of the reason for the delay.
Thank you. Thanks, that clears up everything.
To get to a couple of, well, first let me introduce who's here, and I'll get to the questions I'll try and answer. Leslie Netzer, the project engineer, is here. Rob Bach from Core Spaces, representing the developer, and Jeff Zalesko, who you'll hear a lot more from, the architect for the project, will go over the design and also the design elements, which should address, I think, a lot of the questions you may have. Part of what I have to say is in some ways a repeat of what we've covered before. On the parking ratio, just to get ahead of that, is about the same as the current hub. So in terms of the number of people to the number of parking spaces, what's proposed is very close to its tenths of a percentage point off, I believe. The current hub is 94% leased, and the parking is 95% taken. So all of the parking that's available on site is not currently used. I wasn't aware till tonight where people may be looking to park. Otherwise, it would tend to suggest that the available space in the city system, which the city has quite a bit of, is being used. There's also, as we had said, the issue of it's not so much parking as storage, that people want a car that they can have available, but not one that they want to take in and out all of the time. So that's where we stand on the parking and how that will be. One other issue for the traffic, to get ahead a little bit, is the site plan that you have at the behest of your staff and engineering and public works adds additional space to the hub side, the proposed site side of the alley, in order to expand that undersized alley. To the extent that, in essence, we can do our part to make that broader, that's built into this plan in order to make that more usable. But as I say, the traffic study will be coming, and you'll get more information on that. The detailed security plan is being addressed currently on the current space with the police department specifically. There were issues the first weekend, and it's clear that what we needed to do, Core needed to do, was set up clear communications and staffing. Those have been were addressed immediately in discussions with the police department in terms of security on site, and on a continuing basis as to what security is available at any given time in the building and the communications between them and the police department. So I believe most of that has been addressed. I know that the police department came back last week for a walkthrough and a meeting with the building managers and with Core management in order to work through and be clear on how that will be handled in the future. With respect to this design, you already heard from me previously on the amendments, proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance with respect to the height. The issue is the cost of redevelopment in this area. If you take 3 or 4 story areas and purchase them to redevelop, the cost is such that you need to build higher in order to recoup the cost and keep the rents at a level that is reasonable for the area. That is also the issue for the unit mix, that there is a demand for, and CORE provides at other campuses, 4, 5, and up to 6 bedroom units, because you only have to build the one kitchen. You can vary the number of bathrooms per number of bedrooms, and that also reduces the cost. And also, frankly, they're very popular. It allows providing a more diverse mix of housing types and also a broader range of rents. A lot of the buildings that have gone up, a lot of the units that have been built in the last 2 years that have just coming online in East Lansing are really weighted towards studios, 1-bedrooms, micros, which command the highest rents. And as a result, there's less available throughout the immediate campus area. The idea is to be able to offer that new. Currently, if students want that kind of housing, they have to look to the older housing, the older apartment houses and houses that have been converted to rentals. This would allow them to have that available. This proposal has approximately 25% of the units are 3 and 4 bedroom units. I think about 2/3 of that 25% are 4-bedroom units, and the other third are 3-bedroom units. So the plan was done on the assumption that the changes to the zoning ordinance could be made. I believe when we had done our proposed amendments, we had said that we would simply get rid of the mixed market requirement, which says no more than 3 bedrooms, no more than 25% 3-bedroom. I think staff was clear that they didn't recommend no cap. I don't think that staff necessarily opposes some number of 4 bedrooms, and we think that the mix that's available in this proposal would be sufficient. We think it's sufficient that CORE could build this building and would expect to be clear on that. We don't think it's necessary to remove the cap entirely. The current draft of the form-based code simply says multifamily. So at least for now, the draft would, in the form-based code, simplify uses that dramatically and say, build what you think the market is as long as it meets the forms that we're setting out here. So it would be compliant with future, but it's not compliant now, and we're asking the City Council to change that. The other thing we need to ask the City Council to do is to permit the first floor residential at a ceiling height that actually works. We can't do the townhouse fronts, which we have a sense there's not opposition to. In fact, a number of people have said they like it, but you can't do that with a 17-story first floor height. With respect to building materials, this includes some synthetic material, the EFS. The architect can give you more detail on why that's done. What's there would be compliant, again, with the proposed form-based code, which allows up to 25% above the second story. We had asked for up to 45%. This plan does not incorporate that level of synthetic materials. The other thing that I would mention is we think it's worth looking. Commissioner Cahill did that recently, going there on foot and looking at what's there, the existing fraternity houses, what Bogue Street looks like now, and what the current hub brings to that. We think redevelopment in that area is important. I was talking to a local developer yesterday, and he was saying what CORE is asking for works for the 3 and maybe the 4-story stuff that's there to pay for it and redevelop it. He said, but just so you know, if you're going to redevelop the 6-story because of what that produces in terms of current income, you'd have to build 20 stories. So what it does is reinforce the translation of what it takes in terms of cost of acquisition in order to get redevelopment in the Cedar Village area. It's just not that easy to do. What we're asking for you ultimately, that I'll come back to, is to, in essence, recommend approval of this design conditioned upon changes to the ordinance that would permit it. Jeff Zalesko, who's the architect, can give you much more detail on the design, but we'd be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Mr. Pearson? Vice Chair Bowe?
Well, it's fair to say that these two proposed buildings are suitable only for student housing.
I don't know that that's true. You could, in fact, have young professionals, recent graduates. I know that both Landmark as leased and the inquiries that Abbott is getting are not simply students. There's the old saw that you can't price it too high to keep the students out. I think in this case, what they're discovering, and I think we may be discovering, is that there are people who would like to live that close to campus and that close to downtown. So anecdotally, that's the case. I don't know whether that would happen here. For most of us, we ask ourselves, would we want to live with that many students?
Well, I don't think it's just the students.
Okay.
Are there any young professionals, for example, that you're aware of who are living in the current hub?
In the current hub? I don't know. I can ask and see if that's the case. I don't know the answer to that. I know I've heard of it in Landmark because I happened to run into Greg Ballheim, and he mentioned that to me.
And the thing that I think of as far as young professionals is the 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a tiny, tiny kitchen, and a very small living area.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, at least in my experience, that's something that's attractive to young professionals. So
What we have seen is what's been attractive to young professionals are the very small units, the micro units, both in downtown East Lansing and in downtown Lansing.
and you do have some of those.
Yes, yes. In fact, 75% are not 3 and 4 bedrooms. So those seem to be very much available. The issue is if you do have or want to have roommates, what works in terms of the rent and how much can you bring it down by going to more bedrooms? And if you go to 4 bedrooms, and for example, if you have 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, you can bring the rent down substantially. Rob's standing here, so he must have an answer to one of these questions.
Sorry, yeah, I'm Rob Bach with Core Spaces. So I just wanted to add on that. So a number of other properties around the country, while we say these are marketed towards students, but anyone could live in any of these properties. So I don't have any of the specific stats on the hub this year, but we would expect that whether it could be people, faculty around the campus, it could be people working around East Lansing. I'm happy to go and get that information for you for the next time you come back, so we can.
Yeah, it
answer
isn't
that
really
for
who
you.
they're marketed to, it's who they're,
Right.
my
Yeah, but-
question isn't who they're marketed to, my question is who they're attractive to or who's gonna live there.
Sure.
Other questions for Mr. Pearson before the remainder of the applicants? Commissioner Cahill?
I'm wondering about the traffic flow for these, which is why I was trying to drive the alleys today. All entrance to the building would be from the alley, I take it?
Correct.
Okay. And so, would the alley be one way in your opinion, as is being suggested?
I have no opinion on traffic at all. I'm waiting for the engineers to tell me how that should go, and I assume they're going to base it on what the traffic flow is, where it should go in terms of should it go south, should it go north. I would leave it to them once we have the traffic study to answer those issues.
Okay.
I have lots of opinions, but they may not be helpful to.
The buildings look lovely, and I'm generally not afraid of height either. But I am worried about how many people we're putting in that small an area as far as ingress and egress, whether pedestrian or bike or automobile. Does CORE have experience in other areas where you would have this kind of density in a one-block area?
Yeah, I'd say, kind of the best example of that is in Tucson, Arizona. So one of our first properties there, we delivered that in 2014. Since then, on the same block alongside us, we just finished our third property on the same block. We're starting our fourth one down the block, and we'll be starting our fifth one just a little further on. And alongside that corridor, there's also been other developers who have all been there. So this was kind of a full urban planning, planned unit development of this kind of one area of the community. And it's been a kind of really great success thus far. And so it's not something that necessarily seeing is going to happen here, but it's a very kind of similar aspect of adding density to an area that was not dense before. As long as it's properly planned for, it can be very successful. And it's really a beautiful area to see.
Is there a way you could communicate to us what it is that exists there and how it's working?
Yeah, I think
we can get you at least a plan showing how it's developed, the height, the density, give you an idea what's there.
I would appreciate that very much.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant?
Okay.
You've got other
Thank
people
you.
that, sure.
Good evening, Plan Commissioners. My name is Jeff Salisco. I'm a senior associate with Antunovich Associates. We're the architects working with Core Spaces on this project. I'd like to walk you through the design, and what I'm going to do first is talk about the exterior design, and then I'll go back to the planning of the buildings and talk in some detail about those. There's some good points that have come up that I think I can shed some light on. So with the building, the design of the building, really we have such a wonderful collection in the university across the street. Beautiful masonry buildings, varying in colors, details, stone details. It's a wonderful starting place really for us, especially since we're across Bogue from those beautiful buildings. So we've just a collection of some of them here, and you can see probably if you look closely that we've drawn direct inspiration from many of these buildings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that then. Our first building, the north building, this building, we almost saw this as having something of a Gothic detail to it and some of the detail and character. And so the masonry elements, stone elements, brick elements at the base of the building. In this case, we let the masonry rise up at a portion, really at the corner of the building, all the way up the building. There is a small portion of the building that has it would be shop fabricated ephes, and the reason we have that is because there's details here, and I'm going to show you in another drawing, that we didn't see how we could really accommodate those or create those with other materials. So that was the reason, and my estimation is that that's more like 5 to 10% of the building surface, so it's really a small area intended to be able to pull off what we're trying to accomplish. And you're seeing it here. This is stone elements at the base of the building, cast stone elements. I think they just create a great character. And what they also do, this portion of the building is the lobby, amenity, and really the front of the building. And those are two-story spaces. So this makes up at least a third of the front of the building. So when you see that, we wanted to really emphasize the difference of that portion. So you see these two-story tall spaces, these wonderful arched elements. So that's stone really creating the entry point of the building. Then these elements that rise up above are these, they're an ephes, but pre-produced elements that are brought and hung on the building. As you go further down the building, these are two-story row homes that have street access. So they have direct access off the street. Probably someone different would look at those. This is probably someone who would be looking to rent perhaps more of a market rate. Young professionals, they have their own access. Wonderful little row houses. But we really wanted to differentiate this portion of the building, the main entrance, from those row houses. Also, I wanted to point out a portion of the building, and it's something I think came up in the report, was we don't have the 4-foot setback on Bogue that's part of the zoning. We really wanted, again, to emphasize this part differently. When you get down to 2/3 of the building, we really do have that 4-foot setback. So that was really an architectural element and had to do with just trying to make that reinforce, again, that is the main entry of the building. As we're also looking at this building, we've changed as we rise up to the building. We actually have a corrugated siding sort of system here, along with flat panels at the windows. I'll look at those a little bit more when we get to elevations. So talking now, this is the south building. Again, we wanted to draw from what was across the street, and we wanted these buildings very much to be different from each other. We weren't trying to mimic them at all, and really the planning of them is very different also. You'll see that the south building has 3 elements that rise up, whereas the north building has 2 elements. So there's variation in the way the building's planned. You'll see that a little bit when we get to the planning of the building. Again, here, masonry at the base of the building. You're seeing the row house element in the front view here, and then a different sort of masonry element as we get to the lobby. This is now looking from the other direction. So again, this lobby element, very different from the character of the row homes. And then these 3 elements, we want to create this rhythm with the building. This building is about 288 feet across. So this also provides these really wonderful courtyards that kind of break down the facade as you're moving across the building on Bogue Street. Closer view, again, reinforcing, a different sort of character at the entry of the building than what takes place a little further down. Totally different color palette from the other building. Really wonderful masonry details, but really a totally different sort of detail. Different coloration as we rise up the building, lighter in character than the other building. So totally different elements, different characters. Again, we think both of them feeling very comfortable with the buildings across the street, the beautiful university buildings across the street. So the elevations of the building, so this is on Bogue. Again, this is this element that has additional detail where we were proposing those pre-made ephes elements. The brick goes up 6 stories at the balance of the building and then wraps around the sides. As we get further around, then we are predominantly the corrugated panel system with flat panels around the windows. The base of the building at the parking lot and at the sides would be a split face sort of block system, again in a color consistent with the darker elements in the rest of the building. This is the north side of the building, and then the rear, again, the masonry elements at the base, the split face sort of block elements, and then the corrugated, a lot of glass, because there's really a rhythm. These things are designed based on the unit types we have there. The bigger windows are at the living spaces, the smaller windows are at the bedroom spaces. So the rhythm of those is really based on the planning of the building. So that was the north building, south building. Again, you see this rhythm of these elements, and then the areas in between are set back from the street, again, creating a lot of really significant relief. And again, what you're experiencing at the street, and as you're walking by on the sidewalks, you're really experiencing those masonry elements and then those setbacks. So those are the important elements of the building. Again, the rear of the building, glass in the metal, the corrugated panels at the rear, the side, the brick wraps around, so you're feeling that brick as you see around the sides of the building. So wanted to talk a little bit about the overall site. So first of all, this is Bogue Street, the north building and the south building. This building is a little bit taller than the hub, that building that's just been completed. That's 132 feet. Our building is 152 feet, so it's about 20 feet taller. The difference we feel is really minor. When you're frankly above 6 floors, the variation in height you don't really pick up. And the interesting thing is across Bogue, which is a really wide thoroughfare, plus the university buildings are set back quite far. So the face of our buildings to the face of those buildings is approximately 200 feet. In some cases further, some of those U-shaped buildings set back even like another 30 or 40 feet. So we think it makes sense here. It really makes sense for student housing and for residential product here, close to the university in a wide thoroughfare. We think it makes perfect sense that this is a place where there's height and there's density. It really feels like and seems like the right place. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the plans of these buildings there. The north building is a little smaller. The footprint is smaller. It's 189 feet across the back and 240 feet in front. They're both 147 feet in depth. And then this building, the south building, is 288 feet across. From a planning standpoint, they're really both very similar. We have the lobby, amenities, leasing, exercise rooms. They're really all in this area. And this is a move that we've made with CORE to bring all of those uses downstairs, all of that activity at the street. So you're seeing that activity, there's eyes on the street. but it's just, it's an active place, and we want that to be seen. They're tall spaces, they're 20 feet tall, a lot of glass into them, so you really see very well into those lobbies of the building. And we thought that was a very important component, and it's really something that we're all moving towards. Then along the balance of the street along Bogue, there's row houses. The north building has 5 row houses. They're each 3-bedroom row houses. The south building actually has 6 row houses along that location, again with direct street access. Along the rear, the alley is 15.5 to 16 feet wide. We've actually set the building 2.5 feet from the alley so that we've widened that alley to 18 feet. If development happens on the other side, we would recommend that occupant also widens the alley, but we've widened that alley 2.5 feet to make it just a better place for the vehicles to be moving back and forth. So I don't think that was mentioned earlier. We also have all our utilities towards the rear loading in both of the buildings. Again, they're planned very similarly from that standpoint at the rear in the right locations in relationship to each other. And then each of the buildings has 2 access points. There is an access point that leads into the first floor parking and then to a ramp that goes up to the second floor parking, and then another access that leads down to the lower level parking. So you lead from this point down and you end up at the bottom of the basement in the north building. South building really acts the same way. There's an access point to the first floor, then a ramp that goes up to the second floor, and then an access point directly down to the lower level. So between the 2 buildings, we have a total of 400 parking spaces. There's 720 units between those 2 buildings. Also, so I think it was mentioned that the relationship and ratio between the parking and the bed counts is very similar to these 2 buildings, and that was a target that we went out of our way to make sure that we had hit. I think that covers those 2 buildings, the lower level entirely parking. Then we get up to a mezzanine level. So this mezzanine level has the second level of the residential units of the row houses, and then that parking level. So again, that happens in both buildings. And then the area you see, the white area, is the second level, is really the second story in height of the amenity spaces. So again, really special spaces with great height in both of these buildings. So when we get to this, so we're talking about the first 2 levels, really the base of the building. When we get up to the upper levels, so in the north building, because it's a slightly shorter footprint across, we created 1 courtyard opening, and we really also wanted to differentiate the feel of the 2 buildings as we planned this. So there's 1 courtyard and then this sort of shape that wraps around that courtyard in design. And then when we get to the south building, again, there's these 3 elements that create 2 courtyards in between. And also, this has a lot to do with the planning of the buildings. These buildings very much are designed from the inside out, the way the units are. There's variations and undulations you see take place because of the size and the shape of the various units. So really, it is designed from the inside out when we plan these buildings. When we're looking at this plan, I also wanted to mention there is a courtyard. These courtyards do have some outdoor spaces, but those would be the only outdoor spaces in the building. There are not proposed to be any balconies or any courtyard spaces, any spaces along the front of the building also, as far as terraces, only within these courtyards that you see here. Typical residential plan, similar to the one you saw previously. And then top of the building, each one has a pool component that would also have grilling stations along that area. So both of the buildings have their own. They both have their own amenities, lobby, all the same functions take place in both of the buildings. We talked a bit about the units, and we talked a lot about it, the variation. You know, there's even micro studios, so that if someone they really want to live alone, these units are over 300 square feet, but they're extremely well planned, but very compact. And then the cost does go up as it becomes a studio or a 1-bedroom unit. So there's, again, variation for single occupancy units. And then we have the varying units. This is a 2-bedroom unit. Some of these units also have dual occupancy. So this unit, for instance, has a large bedroom that has 2 units in it, and that factors into to that 25%. Those units are factored into that. But there's a lot of variation, really, to hit different price points and to attract different people. This is one of the 4-bedroom units. Again, the living room in these areas is wider because there's 4 occupants in it. We think it's quite reasonable the way that those are planned. There's also examples. This is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath unit. Again, that's probably the best price point. that they're able to make. This one has a bathroom for every bedroom. Again, they're really value driven. That's why these units exist, and that's why they're part of the planning of the building. We also have, there's another type of a unit that Core's developed, and this is, again, allows someone to really have almost like a single occupancy, but this co-living unit has essentially like two studios in it, and those two studios share then the kitchen area. It's a smaller kitchen and common area, but they really have their own studio. They have a bed, couch, their own closet, their own bathroom. Everything is within their unit except for that kitchen area and the washer dryer. So again, another type of unit to try to hit that low price point. And then lastly, we have the two-story row house units at the first floor. Again, probably totally different people might be looking at something like that, at a unit like that. Those might be the young professionals saying, hey, I love the idea of living here. I'd rather just walk in off the street. I think that's and they do have access directly to the parking lot also. So there's access from the rear and access towards the front, but they are separate from the lobby. The building is 14 floors. That includes the 2 floors that nestle into the 2-story first floor. So the 2-story row houses and the 2 levels of parking are considered 2 floors. So altogether, there are 14 levels. Again, the overall height of the building to the very top, and that's to the top of the pool deck, is 152 feet. Again, about 20 feet taller than the hub next door. Again, and with this, you also see the underground parking. So this is all the parking elements, all the residential, and then those lobby spaces. And then lastly, wanted to talk a little bit about the landscaping. We have tree groups that are indigenous trees, kinko trees, hackberry trees, Kentucky coffee trees along and there'd be large trees along the front of the building. Based on the code requirements, we have a brick element, paving element along the street, and then behind that are concrete walks. I did want to point out there was some discussion about, I think one of the issues that we were not complying with was the sidewalk, and portions of our sidewalk are over 25 feet. Most of it is really 20 feet along the building. We have a couple spots where we get a little bit narrower at the entry points, but we've held the trees away from those points also. So again, we're trying to create that presence at the street. There was a reason for that area that's smaller, but really is a small area of the entire frontage of the buildings. So with that, that's what we're proposing for the project. If I could answer any questions, or anyone else on our team, we'd love to do that now.
Any questions for Mr. Zalesko?
Zalesko, yes.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, so inevitably with smaller parking, not everyone's going to have a vehicle. How do you envision the ride sharing working? Is that going to be along Bogue Street or along the rear of the building?
Well, I think it's probably along the rear of the building. That's
Okay.
probably the appropriate way to do that, yes. Because Bogue, I think there's just too much movement along Bogue in the north direction to have it take place there.
Also, I'd really like to see some of the elevations from the rear side of the building, from the rest of Cedar Village, to kind of envision what it would look like with those. I didn't see those in there. Maybe
Sure,
more.
our rendering's focused on the
Yeah.
Bogue side for sure. Okay, we can definitely do that.
Other questions for the applicant? If you'd stick close, we'll
Okay.
probably have some.
Thank you.
Sure. At this point, I'd like to open up the public hearing for this. Unless, did you have more? I got 3 names and only heard from 2 of you. The project engineer? No? Okay, all
Well,
right.
this is Leslie, I'm the
All right,
engineer.
that's-
I think they've covered it. The traffic study will address a lot of the questions as far as circulation, et cetera. We'll
Sure.
work with staff, so.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open up the public hearing for this particular proposal. I have 2 cards specifically that asks to speak about this project, though after those 2 individuals are done, if there are anybody else in attendance here that would like to add questions or comments, I will certainly invite you to come forward at that time. But the first one I have is from Mr. Ed Rushton.
I'm Ed Rushton.
Thank you.
I have been a student at Michigan State University. This is my 4th year. I have lived in the Cedar Village neighborhood for 2 of those years. Before that, my older brother lived in Cedar Village, and my oldest brother also lived in Cedar Village about 4 years before I came. And I am very worried about the language that is being used to describe this area. The applicants have discussed the fact that they believe that there are students who want to live in this area, who want to be close to campus, and they are right. But there is a difference between students who want to live close to campus and students who need to live close to campus. Cedar Village, and if you ask anybody who lives in Cedar Village and in that neighborhood right now, if you ask anybody why they live there, they don't say because of the curb appeal or because of how beautiful the area is or because of how nice it looks from the corner. What matters to them is proximity and affordability. This is a section of the off-campus housing area that is welcoming to lower income students who rely on a space. If they cannot afford to live on campus, they rely on a space in which they can make it to campus without having to commute in a way that is too expensive for them to educate themselves and to be able to remain financially stable while educating themselves for a 4-year education. I think that we are on the verge of making a terrible mistake if we allow the Cedar Village neighborhood to start to be impeded upon by housing units that will target higher income students and will not target lower income students, will not be welcoming to lower income students. This is a project that has a plan to build 75% of its units being micro units, which are the most expensive units. I can say from personal experience, I do not live in Cedar Village anymore. I moved out of there for this semester as I close out my college career. But I can tell you right now that many of the people who are living there, my younger brother is coming up and he will be moving into Cedar Village next year. He's very excited about it. And I can tell you that people there already feel like they're being pushed out. There is a 15-story project now that is towering over them, and they know that 2 more are coming their way. This is a project that blocked off an exit and an entry to their neighborhood for an entire year. We had no idea that it would be put up, and then we were never informed of a date in which it would be removed, even though people working on the project told us that it was only temporary. The Cedar Street going onto Grand River was completely fenced off, and there was no way for people we would have to circumvent traffic in order to get into our neighborhood. I think that what I most like about Michigan State University is that it's a university primarily concerned with lifting up students from all walks of life, and this is a city concerned with making sure that this university can achieve its goals. And so I would think that the quality of life for its lesser privileged students would be considered with greater weight than the width of our real estate profitability. I hear that redevelopment is important to this area, and making this area look beautiful is important to somebody. But I know that it's not important to the people who are living there right now. I know to them what matters is affordability and proximity to campus, because there is no other area in East Lansing that allows lesser privileged students to be so close to the classes that they need to go to while being able to also balance a job on the other hand and remain financially stable in a college career. And so what I worry about when I know that another generation of my family is coming into this school is that when people say that this isn't an area right now that you want to look at, and we want to make it an area that you do want to stare at and go, wow, what a beautiful area. That falls on deaf ears in Cedar Village, and it falls on deaf ears with my family, because what it tells me is that it's not necessarily that people don't want to look at the Cedar Village buildings, it's that they don't want to look at us, that they don't want to look at people who come from all walks of life. And so in conclusion, I think that any expansion of the hub property would be a terrible mistake, and it would directly and negatively impact the student body of Michigan State University. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Rushton?
I was wondering, You mentioned the road being closed off and that being a problem for you when you were living there. Of course, you're not living there this year, right?
No.
Okay. Do you know anything about, has the current building caused any other problems?
Well, there was
living in
conversations
the
about
area?
the alley, right? Of a traffic report on the alley behind the hub right now, if I'm not mistaken. They were saying that they're trying to expand the alley to make sure that traffic can be more free-flowing through there. I know right now that is causing a large problem, the alley behind the hub. There's a space directly behind it in which there's an alley, which there is apartments to the right facing River Street, and there are houses on the left facing Grand River. And I would honestly suggest, if it was up to me, we'd put in 3 stop signs at the end of that alley where it comes to the hub, because during rush hour, there is so much confusion because none of those spaces are large enough for 2-lane roads, yet there are cars trying to go through the alley to get to their homes, or through the alley to get to the hub, or through the alley to get from the hub to Grand River, and it's causing a massive logjam. And I know that there are people also from the hub who are trying to avoid that traffic jam and just parking in in the parking spaces where people who rent apartments in Cedar Village and people who rent houses in Cedar Village, their parking spaces are getting taken up by people in the hub who want to avoid that rush hour traffic jam. So I know that there are issues with that alley right now. And saying that we're going to come in and improve traffic, well, that's an issue that the hub created. So it seems like they're coming in here to be the heroes of a problem that they started in the first place. So I don't really see that as a solution. I see that as just a new way of trying to coax up a need for these buildings to be there when there really isn't one.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Sullivan.
Real quick, what are the ballpark for typical rents there right now that you've been paying? And does that come with a parking spot?
Yeah, it's usually about $600 to $650 a month, and it's about $200 to $300 cheaper than living on campus in many situations.
600 for a 1-person bedroom?
Usually, mine was a duplex, so it was just a 2-person apartment.
So it's $300 per person?
No, it was still $600 a person. Yeah.
Thanks for your input. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a card for David Kraus. Mr. Kraus?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I don't quite know where to start with this, but I'll give you some of my opinions on it. This area is going to have 1,773 students living in there. That's massive. I mean, and if you think about that, now, maybe these out-of-town developers don't know this, but we know what happens in the Cedar Village area. And so you got these many more people cause trouble for the police department. And I don't think that's good planning. They also say that there's, I worry about the downtown too, but in effects on the small businesses and things like that, which are already being affected. These buildings, they say one of the ways to approve it was that they must be compatible with surrounding properties. Well, how do you think you'd feel if you were a farmhouse who's been a long-standing value tenant for living in East Lansing? They have a long record of this. And now they're going to be sandwiched between 2 14-story buildings? That's not very neighborly, and it's not compatible. I haven't seen any studies on shadows, and they're going to be big, and they're going to be buried the whole time. So it's just too much. And that's what's going on, and that particularly in this area. And the other building I thought was 10 stories, the first one, but maybe it's 12. But now they say, well, we're just 130, we're going to go to 150. Oh, that's nothing. Well, okay, what if it's 150? Let's go to 170 then. You know, I mean, there's a point where you stop. You know, and that analogy is not great. So what makes them think now they got to go, you know, more than 10 stories or whatever. It's just purely the economics of the whole thing. But I think we really need to look at what is going to happen with this area. A traffic study will be interesting, you know, and we'll see where it goes. I know that area very well, and right now, it's really crowded around there, and so just my thoughts. You can absorb and do what you want to with them.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Kraus? Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, what would be your ideal use for this area? Keep it as it is, put something like townhomes there? What would be
Less
your-
density,
Okay.
not so high. That's an awful lot of people to put in this area. I'm a developer. I'm not against development, but there are certain practicalities that you have to think about. And you know, for instance, the last building I did in downtown East Lansing, I was told, you want to get approved, no four bedrooms. And that was, so I had to redesign every floor plan on that building and eliminate the 4 bedrooms. So 4 bedrooms are, you know, they're one way, they can keep the rents down per person a little bit, and, you know, but don't deny there's not a demand for that. But the fact is that it's what's fair for one person should be fair for another person. You know.
Is that the Bailey and Grand River property?
Pardon?
Bailey and Grand River,
Yeah,
is that the property?
565, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Other questions for Mr. Kraus? Thanks for your
Right,
input.
thank you.
I don't have any other cards for this particular application, so if there's anybody in the public that would like to come forward and make comment, now would be, please, yep. If you'd state your name and fill out a card for us so that we, Mr. Fisk, but if you would
Good to
please
see you.
state.
How are
thank
you?
I'm good,
Thanks
thank
for the opportunity to speak. My name's Mark Fisk, 736 Glenhaven. I'm a rental property owner. I'm a business owner in East Lansing, employer in East Lansing, and again, just thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am very concerned about the impact of adding hundreds and hundreds of new units to the city without a comprehensive housing study that would look at the impact that this new housing is having on the whole town. So these are big decisions to make. I think we ought to make them with research. I also think it's, if you drive around the town right now, anecdotal evidence would tell you there's a lot of for rent signs at this time in the market. Now, I haven't looked into each and every circumstance there. There's a lot of for rent signs. And so it would say, again, anecdotally, that the impact of even these projects right now is not a positive one in terms of occupancy. That's why I think you need some data. Because if you think that student rentals create challenges, imagine the challenges that will come with under-rented properties, properties where landlords cannot afford to maintain their properties, vacant homes, and imagine those problems for the neighborhoods. Because that is the long-term prospect if we continue to barrel ahead with these projects without research. Now, imagine this. Imagine if Michigan State University decided to enforce its policy requiring sophomores to live on campus, which is the current policy at Michigan State. It's not enforced because their dorm occupancy rates have been very robust. But if you add hundreds and hundreds of new units to the market and that occupancy rate is impacted and the occupancy rate of the dorms are connected to Michigan State University's financing, they could enforce that. Imagine the market if sophomores were required to live on campus and they were taken out of the mix. Imagine if we had an economic downturn. Again, all of these things, I don't have the answers for them, but I think it is time to hit the pause button and to look at the impact of these projects, the impact they're having today, and the impact they could have if we add these new projects to the market. I also think, I hope the study, and I hope what I'm asking the Planning Commission to do is just advocate for that research and look at those answers, get some data. I also hope it will look at what I consider to be a very dangerous and irresponsible notion that we should use density to pull student rentals out of neighborhoods. That is not going to happen. But it's being put forth by some as a magic solution to somehow pull student rentals out of neighborhoods, and they will magically convert back to owner-occupied. We should look at that. I don't think it's going to happen, but I can tell you it's going to be a very slow and painful process to watch the experiment play out. So again, thank you for what you're doing, and I would just ask you to advocate for a comprehensive housing study so we can get some research on what the impact is to our town today and in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Question for Mr. Fisk. Vice Chair.
Yes.
Yes. When you say a comprehensive housing study, what do you think that study needs to
Well, I
include?
think we have to look at long-term trends at Michigan State University in terms of enrollment. I don't know what those are. Some have said the university is peaked out. I don't know that. We should look at that because we're all connected and linked together. How much housing can the market support? I mean, that's a basic question. I don't have the answer to that, but there are experts that can look into that. And I think that these are questions that need to have answers before we bring this volume of units onto the market. There may be other questions that you all as experts in this area would want to look at, but I do think it's time to hit the pause button and take a look at those questions before we barrel ahead.
Other questions? If you would fill out
Thank
a
you.
card so we get the
Yep,
spelling
will
of
do.
the complicated spelling of your last name. Thank you. Invite other members of the public to come forward if they would like to make comments on this particular project. I'm seeing one. Yep, please. You do have a complicated spelling to your last name, so I'll ask you to fill out a card, please.
Tim Rosowski, and I live at 613 Grove Street, and I just kind of have three comments. One is, I think, and this might be for the developer, it would be great, I think, if the developer could clearly articulate what the benefits are to, I've been a resident here for almost 40 years, so as a non-student person, what are the benefits to the community? So I think at some point, maybe this is not the right spot, but perhaps at City Council or something, it should be clearly laid out what the tax revenue expectations are versus, because as a community member, we'll see, some more density, some congestion. Although it's interesting, I'm not seeing a great deal of congestion as a result of the hub that was there. So that's one element at some point in the process. I think the community would like to know what are the benefits to us that live here year round. The other comment is I do think because of all the developments that we have, we probably need to see what impact they're having on our community. Because we have the landmark, we have the hub, we have Skyview, which is outside of our community. We have the new project being built on Abbott and Grand River. So we don't really fully know what the implications of all of those projects are on kind of our lifestyle or our community. I'm generally pro-development, so I'm not really speaking against it. I just think some of these questions should be answered. And then the last one kind of gets back to when I was here before about a different project, but this is the aesthetics. And so you commented, for example, this is why I decided to speak on this, because you commented on the existing, the hub building was a very beautiful building, I think. I don't think so. I think and I was particularly interested when the architectural office was speaking about the corrugated metal panels. The existing hub is quite dark. The metal panels, there are two types of metal panels there. One seems to already have a fair amount of dents in it. And then I think the corrugated panels that were used on the lower level, to me, just don't seem urban enough. They don't seem high quality enough. And so if we look at the different projects sky view. I think some people have concerns over the oil canning in the metal panels. I think Landmark, they did a great deal of effort of trying to really look at colors and look at the design of that. So this is just a general question or idea, I think, is if this project is approved, would the developer, would the architects be open to some community input in terms of selection of colors and facade materials? Because I wouldn't want to see these, 2 additional buildings or 1 additional building, I guess it is, with the same sort of dark, narrow corrugated metal panel for 150 feet or whatever it might be. I think as a community we won't like that look, and particularly won't like the look down the road a few years. I mean, think of it 50 years from now, and whether that's going to be a good look. So that's just a question, I guess, of whether the developer would be open to putting their palette of materials out on the table with the colors and with the materials, and so that there's some view. I mean, I don't think the Planning Commission can control aesthetics, but I guess that would be a request to the developers. All right.
It wouldn't be unusual for us to see that information as part of the submittal process, but typically it wouldn't be something that a public vote would be taken, but it is an unusual project, or a different project. I thought I saw a couple of hands for questions.
Okay.
For Tim, just a second. If you would indeed fill out a card.
Oh, yes.
And maybe hold on to it for the end of the meeting, because
Okay.
we'll save some paper there. Questions for Mr. Brzezowski? Maybe I didn't see any hands. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yep.
Once again, I'll ask, it looks like. Ms. Marr?
Short person. Nancy Marr, Prime Housing Group, 1390 East Grand River Avenue. Our family owns about 200 apartment units in East Lansing. The building I'm speaking of specifically tonight is 208 Cedar Street, which is located just to the east of Farmhouse Fraternity, so just behind the properties that are being proposed, and 3 buildings behind the current hub that was built. We've owned the property since 1990, so I have a bit of experience to speak of about the history of the area, and also what happened during the construction of the current property, and what the current parking traffic flow issues are from a reality base as opposed to a proposed statistics base. As you know, the construction went on for, was it 18 months, 2 years or something like that. They closed off Cedar Street for pretty much the duration of the project, which was a huge inconvenience to all of the neighbors in the area. So as I'm looking through the staff analysis of this project, it talks about the effects on the neighbors. And that is one effect that was really tough on our area. We were assured by the city of East Lansing that so you have the north-south alleyway, and that's how all the properties on Bogue Street and Cedar Street have their parking lots, okay? And this north-south alleyway, you can access it from, Village Drive from the south, or you used to be able to pull behind Giorgio's and 7-Eleven to get to it from the north. And we were assured that that north entrance would be maintained opened. It didn't happen. That closed promptly, and it's supposedly been reopened, but I drive a Suburban. My colleague drives a Cube van, and we can't get to that alleyway from that north entrance. So most mechanical contractors drive some sort of a truck vehicle, and we're having to come in from the south. So our access to our parking lots has been restricted. I know that it's either dumpsters, or it's people parking there, or it's construction vehicles and so forth, and I'm not really sure that that's been rectified at this point. I know that parking is an issue. We've already started parking enforcement for the fall. We have 20 apartments in that building. We have 30 parking spaces, and I ticket 8 cars on a morning. That's a third of my parking spaces that are being taken up by non-residents. We get daily calls from people from the hub asking about parking. So I guess I'm surprised to hear that 95% of their 95% capacity, maybe it has something to do with the cost that they're charging for their parking. I don't know, but we are getting calls on a regular basis for parking. The alleyway is in really bad disrepair. I agree with the engineering analysis that north-south alleyway should be required to be
removed and replaced because it wasn't in the best condition before construction started. And then I don't know how many heavy vehicles we saw drive up and down that north-south alleyway during the construction process. In August, when we were turning over Cedarbrook, I saw a gravel train with 2 pups behind it driving down that poor north-south alleyway. I saw the construction crews use farmhouse parking lot as their own all summer long. Those are students. It's an association. They're really good neighbors. And I saw their construction team use their parking lot as their own. They used their dumpster as their own. They used it as a driveway. I saw equipment coming in and out of the farmhouse. That's not an alleyway. That's not a city alleyway. That's all farmhouse's property, and I saw them use it as a driveway. So it was a nuisance, and it was a burden to the neighbors for 18 months to 24 months during the process. So this is the reality that we're dealing with. I walk onto campus going to a class at Berkey Hall from my office on Grand River, and as I approach at 4:45 on a Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, by the time I'm at the McDonald's, I'm in a shadow. That's a 10-story building. If they build a 14-story building, I have a feeling my Cedarbrook residents are never going to see the light of day. So I guess when they say it's only another 20 feet, that's kind of major. So you can say that on the other side of Bogue Street, it's 200 feet to the university buildings. That's fantastic. I'm right behind them. I'm not 200 feet away. My residents are not 200 feet away. So these are important things to keep in mind, that when you're looking at this project, parking is an issue. They can say that they're not going to bring their cars, but we know that that is not the reality. That may be what the statistics are showing them. That is not the reality that we're dealing with right now. The only people that are benefiting right now is parking enforcement at $45 per private property parking ticket, and the towing companies, because they're bringing their cars and they need a place to put them. So to let them build another one with very little parking, again, is a burden not only on the neighboring properties, because they're going to park in our lots, but what's it going to do to the neighbors to the north of Grand River? Because they have to put them somewhere, because they're going to bring their cars. I just echo what Mr. Kraus mentioned. And it was interesting. Somebody here said, they said, okay, we have this project, and now we just have to get city council to change the zoning code to accommodate this project. And all I think to myself is, why have zoning code in the first place if you're going to pitch the project first and then you're going to massage the zoning code to make that project work? Trying to figure out why we have a comprehensive plan and why we have a zoning code in the first place if that's the premise that we're going to work from. I don't disagree with redeveloping the area. I'm not pro or anti redevelopment. I don't think 14 stories makes sense. I'm sitting there in that back row and I'm thinking to myself, they used these statistics against us in 2000 to blight this area. They used density at Cedar Village. They used the number of parking tickets. They used the number of noise tickets in order to justify declaring the area as blighted. And they were, in 2000 and 2004 as well, the high density area of that area was not okay. And now suddenly it is. It's not been that long since 2000 and 2004. It doesn't make any sense. Rideshare, I heard somebody say something about rideshare is going to be at the rear. It is a one-way alley. It's not two ways. People drive really kind of crazy fast. It's a little bit scary, and you kind of take this serpentine path at this point because you're avoiding the major potholes that have been created. But it is truly a one-way alley. So if they're going to do a ride share, I'm trying to figure out how ride share, you mean like Uber, right? So somebody's going to sit there and wait to pick up their person. How does anybody maneuver around them to get out or into their parking lot? if they're gonna block that alleyway. So that doesn't seem prudent. I wondered to myself, I did a count of the approximate number of spaces for the 6 properties that are being sold in order to do this project, and there's about roughly 80 parking spaces maybe that go with those current properties. So you're talking about 80 vehicles that are utilizing that alleyway, and you want to go from 80 up to 400. So I'm wondering if you can direct traffic out directly onto Bogue as opposed to onto that north-south alleyway, because you're going to increase that traffic by 4 times at least, if my math is right. So I have written some of my thoughts out, and I can give those to you in this letter. And if you have any questions, let me know. But there's a lot of history here. Farmhouse is 2 stories, by the way. I heard that question asked. It's not 3 stories. It is a 2-story building. I just ask, like Mark said, that we pause. We allowed a 10-story building to be built with 22% parking. And we don't know how that's going to affect, we don't know how that's affecting the area. I can already tell you how it's affecting us, and it's not in a positive fashion with the parking situation. So move-in was August 21st, and we're on September 11th. Do we really have a feel for how that is affecting the area and the neighbors? Do we know if that's really a good model for how to build an apartment building in that area before we go ahead and allow 2 more that are even taller into that area with the same lack of parking? Any questions?
Thanks. Question for Ms. Meyer?
Thanks for your
We will
time.
take the letter. If you.
Yep,
thank
right
you.
there. Oh, thanks.
Any other members of the public that would be interested in speaking on this particular application? Mr. Hagan. Good evening.
Matt Hagan, 927 East Grand River, for Hagan Realty, family business. We've been in business here for 50 years now, believe it or not. Pretty much my entire life. The city has tried to put us out of business, actually, and deter us from continuing. What we do is own and manage property in East Lansing. So currently there's a mindset, I think, that the more apartments that can be built, the more of the students we pushed out of the single-family houses and into apartments. And that's one philosophy, I guess, I anticipate with 10 kids that my brothers and I currently have, that 50 years from now we'll still have a Hagan Realty and we'll still be renting houses. So I remember 2008. I remember the housing bubble that happened across the country, and I'm a little concerned that East Lansing is building their own housing bubble right now with apartments. And as been said by everyone so far associated in my field, we really need to slow down and do a study, take a breath, see how the ones that are out there are impacting not only houses but apartments as well. In the staff report on page 6, there's number 6 talks about the proposed project and how it would materially diminish the economic value of adjacent properties and the city as a whole. I'm sure that people want to say, well, he's in the student rental business, he's got sour grapes, he's going to say that this is bad for his business. I also live in East Lansing, and I drive by a lot of houses and neighborhoods and areas, and it is a concern of mine that the more apartments that are built, the more deterioration that you're going to see in some of these surrounding neighborhoods and outskirts properties. I don't see the good quality houses that are rented to students currently as not being continued to be rented by students. There are definitely some that are not in the greatest of shape and there are outskirts that probably will go empty. And that's a concern. What happens to those who either lives in them or rents them, as was earlier mentioned. So I don't know if this much density here is really in the best interest of the city. I've sat on commissions before, and I know there's certain things that you go through and you have to check off. Yes, it meets that. Yes, it meets that. And obviously, that's what the staff report's intended to do. I guess I would just point out that I don't know as a city as a whole that that's really truly a benefit or not going to be a negative situation there. So obviously there's a long way to go with this. Doesn't meet hardly any criteria, so that's got to be worked through. I'll continue to come to these meetings, I'm sure, and speak one way or the other about it. Happy to answer any questions, but currently, obviously I'm opposed to the project, and we'll continue to see how it goes.
Questions for Mr. Hagan? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any other members of the public that would be interested in speaking on this particular topic, this application? Okay, I'm seeing no one come forward, so we will close the public hearing and return this to the commission. Your preferences, some directions to staff or the applicant? Vice Chair Boyle.
I have a question for staff, and that is, there has been earlier discussion regarding a study for the need for additional housing in East Lansing. And I know there was discussion at council about that. And I believe I recall that staff said that there was ongoing discussion in staff about structuring a comprehensive housing study to get us some information about that. Do you know where that is currently at?
Yes, generally. So the city is talking with Lansing and Meridian Township to try to pool our resources for a comprehensive study of the region, the greater Lansing area. That may or may not materialize, but it also sounds like Tri-County Regional Planning is considering something as well, so we may be the test study for their effort. So we're still in the process of kind of solidifying partners and trying to make those arrangements for pursuing that. But yes, we are committed to moving forward with the study, but I don't have any details on how that's going to shake out at this point.
Do you have any idea about the timeline for accomplishing a study?
That is a major point of discussion amongst all of those partners, but I don't have a sense for that at this point. Obviously, time is of the essence, so we are looking to expedite that as quick as possible, but I don't have a timeline at this point.
Or any idea about whether it's a year or 2 years or 3 years?
3 months, 8 months?
Yeah, I can see if I can find something out quickly here. But keep talking, it may take a minute.
Other questions or directives for staff? This is Ms. Schmidt's staff report, so perhaps any other questions might be directed at her while Mr. Haywood's looking for information, or for the applicant. Commissioner Cahill.
Just there was, without going into the relocating the reports from building and engineering and that, but they were suggesting they wanted more detail and another review. And I would just, before I'd want to move forward with this, I'd want the new plans and the thoughts of our various departments.
Yeah, and I thought actually engineering's comments were particularly pointed. They made some specific points of saying, you know, that a caveat regarding that these plans look very schematic. It's a note I don't think I've seen in the past, may have, but just hadn't noted it before, that these were fairly basic, which is, you know, we generally see, they've got a long list. In this case, it seemed like he was calling it out specifically. Please, go ahead.
No, that's basically my point, is I assume there are going to be new plans, more detailed plans submitted, and I would want them reviewed by our staff.
Sorry.
Prior to moving forward.
I'm just looking at my notes, and that there was a specific note from the engineering staff that specific identification of parking during construction crews. That sort of looking back to Ms. Marr's comments, that the comment that engineering had made that spaces during construction for parking would have to be identified or sort of maintained. Other questions for staff or directives for the applicant? I would echo Mr. Marzowski's comments about the sort of the three things that he said. I guess I'm less concerned about the aesthetics, but it's not an unfair point. But that that if the benefits, that is to say the revenue that's going to be generated from this particular project and how ultimately that's going to benefit the city could be outlined, that I think that would be of great benefit to my way of looking at this particular project. And he actually sort of hinted at this sort of study that is of an unknown length, but at least his first 2 points I could fall in line with. Any other concerns or questions? Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the point was brought up about a lot of the potential tenants would perhaps wish to keep their car somewhere else. They don't need direct access to it every single day. And I know that that's done on campus with a lot of the dorm buildings where they have lots that are a little bit further out. I wonder if that is something that the developer would consider looking at in regards to this project.
That could certainly be, that's probably something that would be discussed when we ultimately see this at its last time. I will tell you that I brought that to council with the previous iteration of this particular project, and perhaps rightly so, I had my wrist slapped in that it was asked what the rest of the commission had thought of that idea, and it actually hadn't come from the commission. It came to me late after the commission had already rendered its recommendation to council, and so it was set aside by council. So it's perhaps something that if there is interest, we could discuss that at the time when this comes back as old business, and if we want to add that as a condition, I guess I would be interested in hearing what the applicant thinks about it at some point, but that's something that we could ask for it, and commission could decide to leave it in place or take it away, whether it's a condition or not. But it's a fair point. Vice Chair Boyle.
Yeah, I had another question, and actually this is a question I should have asked earlier of staff. When you calculated the number of charging stations that are required by the ordinance for these buildings, are those calculated according to the number of the occupancy, or are they calculated according to the number of parking spaces?
Required parking spaces.
Okay, so they were the required parking spaces based on the occupancy of the two buildings?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, that's really
Yes.
helpful.
It's a good distinction in this case, isn't it? Commissioner Watson.
How much is parking at the hub?
We can have that for the next time we see this.
Okay.
I don't know the answer, but before you moved on, I wanted to ask, I wasn't clear on the question you were asking about campus parking.
I think it was really more, my idea, and I think this is what Commissioner Sullivan was getting at, was that if on-site parking isn't made available, if remote parking could be made available, my intention at the time was that it be employed as a test, that if indeed there was no demand for the cars, for cars and parking, it would effectively be demonstrated by the lack of need for remote parking, in which case the need to reserve those and pay for them would dissolve and sort of evaporate within the year or so.
So it's what's available through
I don't know ultimately. I understand that there's
Okay.
parking at the, there's potentially remote parking available at Forest Acres.
Okay, so
but I don't know where they
what's
go.
available, where it is, those
Sure,
questions.
exactly,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, I just wanted to make sure I understood, so.
Sure.
We would look at, is that?
Yeah,
The
there's
same.
parking available.
Okay,
on streets,
all right,
right.
great.
The argument was made that the
Right.
land is what's expensive, so perhaps there could be
Okay.
2 tiers of
Fair
parking
enough.
where, yeah.
Right, okay.
It would also demonstrate that need, again, over time, that if there wasn't a demand for it remotely, there doesn't seem to be that there would be a demand for it effectively at all. That doesn't ultimately get to Commissioner Watson's question, but perhaps we could get that information in the next packet. Thank you. Another question, Commissioner Watson?
Yes. So last time we talked about ordinance 1462, right? And we gave our recommendations. Where are we at with that?
Yes.
Because it sounds like the applicant is still interested in the adjustments. And so where do we go from here with?
So that ordinance is scheduled for a public hearing before council on October 8th.
Okay.
We'll take action on it at that time. We are reviewing, and our staff report is based on the current standard for the East Village District, not as amended by 1462. So we didn't want to make the assumption that we understood where that would land.
And that still hasn't gone to public hearing in front of council?
Correct, October 8th.
Any other questions for staff or applicant? All right, we'll see this again presumably in October, maybe as early as the 9th. That moves us on to item 6B. This is a site plan and special use permit. The public hearing will be held to consider a site plan and special use permit from 3225 West Road LLC to build 2 new buildings, a 4-story, 107-room hotel, and a 4,015-square-foot medical marijuana provisioning center. Mr. Parcell, welcome.
Yes, hello. So I'll be covering this development and the corresponding lot split with it. The review was done here under the assumption as if it would be B2, or the zoning district B2, because they have a rezoning application in at this time as well. The proposal here is to eliminate the single-family home and corresponding pole barn, or raise the structure on the site, and create a new 4-story hotel and provisioning center / retail suite on site. The retail suite was not mentioned in here. There was a little bit of confusion until we reviewed the plans again today. As it states in the notice, it's a 4,000 square foot site for a provisioning center, but building 1, which is the provisioning center, is actually a 6,000 square foot site. But it is always noted in the plans as building 1 and building 2, not separated by suite. There are some things that the applicant will need in this that have been discussed between staff and the applicant, one of which is the traffic impact study. We discussed that today. They will be working on that and sending it over to the Transportation Commission and working with our engineering staff to get that ready, since this is a much more intensive use on site. Additionally, there are no elevations for the provisioning center included in the overall plans. And I think there is no pre-qualification information from the state for the licensing of the provisioning center included either. So we will be working through that. The application is as what you've seen, and I'm here for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Parcell? Commissioner Cahill.
I'm confused about a couple of things. One, there is an application for rezoning for this, but it's not in front of us for some reason.
I don't know when that's on the schedule for. Mr. Haywood would have the project tracker with him.
No, that is on our agenda tonight.
The lot split.
The lot split, but not rezoning.
It doesn't say that as part of the narrative here.
So item D, ordinance 1468.
Nope, that's
That's
the one
the
above
Grove
it.
Street.
That's the Grove Street.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fine. C has the lot split, and I actually, when I read it, I had presumed that was
Maybe I didn't-
going to be the rezoning as well.
So it was introduced by council last night, so it will come to us.
The rezoning.
So it's not.
Yeah, so it'll come to us next month.
So we'll see this 3 different times, and then plus again is old business, all right? So, does that answer your question?
Not entirely. When we look at this, it's analyzed as though rezoning has already occurred.
Right.
And I would like to know how it fits in the current rezoning, because not on something that might happen sometime in the future.
These uses would not be allowed under the current zoning.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, residential agricultural is the current zoning, and the hotel and the provisioning center would not be allowed. Well, the provisioning center would be in the overlay district for that. So it would, but the hotel use would not be allowed.
Okay.
It'd be a pretty short application.
Well, that was my thought.
Yeah.
Why are we dealing with it if they haven't gotten the rezoning?
Commissioner Vice Chair?
Well, and also when we don't have the elevations. It really bothers me if we have a public hearing scheduled when we're anticipating that people will have the opportunity to comment on things when they don't have all of the information that they would need or like to have in order to give us comments and hopefully improve the plans and improve the application.
Sure.
So it just seems kind of premature tonight, I guess.
Noted, thank you.
You both know I don't disagree with that. Ultimately, We'll see this again regardless, and we might see it again and again if that information isn't ultimately made available to us. The public hearing was posted. There's opportunity to speak on it tonight. There will be potentially future opportunities to speak on it. I'm not arguing that I have, you can see I've got 3 things highlighted on my sheet here, and those go right down the 3 things that were ultimately missing from the application here.
And nobody, no one came up to speak on it, but.
Well, not just yet, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a couple of opportunities for that still. So, Commissioner Cahill.
And that's the other place I was going here, and Commissioner Boyle stated it, I think, quite well, is that if we're going to have a public hearing, it should be on what's actually going to be proposed. And I think we need to think about if someone submits an application like this that doesn't even have the drawings, how we can't really have a legitimate public hearing because the public hasn't seen what we're supposed to be reviewing.
Indeed.
We haven't, and the public hasn't. And I think we have to put some sort of checks or brakes on this to say, wait a minute, you don't have this. When you have it, we'll put it on the agenda for the Planning Commission. And the other issue would be the rezoning. If it hasn't changed, and I looked at the zoning because I was thinking, well, there has to be rezoning. And I wondered, is there any reason why this would be rezoned to B2 other than that it's a marijuana provisioning center and council's marked it into that place? Because if you look at the zoning map, just if you look at the colors, you've got to go a long way to find a yellow speck that's anywhere near this. So my point is, I don't think the ducks are in order.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Purcell?
Thank you.
Thank you. Stick close. Is the applicant here tonight? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Andy Andre from Avanti Development Group. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I would like to speak about a couple of the issues I brought up. We did submit for a rezoning application as part of this. I'm not sure exactly how the agenda gets set or situated, but we did want to make sure that that the rezoning was part of this. I do want to speak a little bit to that, is that when you do look at when you look at that area as part of the future land use within the master plan, there is this property, and I think just one of the adjacent properties that is left over that is scheduled for some type of redevelopment, rezoning. I think it's a commercial rezoning. And so we felt that that business zoning district would be appropriate for this and would also be situated well with the surrounding businesses that go along with it. As part of the application that we did submit, I did check today on the city website, the agenda, the plans, the information that you have in front of you was all available on there. So the public did have an opportunity to see that. And I know that's because of the public hearing that we're at right now with the special land use. And as Mr. Chairman has pointed out, you have a couple rounds at this. There's no two ways about it. We're here as a public hearing, solicit feedback, hear the information from staff. We'll have the opportunity to incorporate that and be back in front of you. So we want to make sure that that rezoning is appropriate, that the special land use also is fitting to this as well, which we feel that it is. A couple of the items that were brought up by staff, and I don't want to be presumptive on this, but it was brought up, and you do have that information in front of you. When we look at this, we did not have a elevation for the building elevation for the facade, and that for the building, the provisioning center and retail suite. It would be a single-story building, mostly brick, that type of thing. Nothing, no EFS or anything, something that's a little bit more enduring, such as stone and brick, and we will surely have that information the next time that we come back. One of the things that we took very much consideration in when we looked at this development was how the buildings are situated onto the property. If you had an opportunity, I know it's a little bit dense, it's a little bit thick wooded out there, but there's quite a bit of grade change, actually elevation between the highway right-of-way and coming down to the road. And so we actually built that into the design of the site, where we situated the provisioning center building towards the rear, towards the highway. And actually that sits, the floor elevation on that building sits about 5 or 6 feet below the adjacent property. So that building sits down, it's lower, it'll be well situated within that property. If you look at detail within the grading that we did. The other thing is there were some, I believe, a couple comments regarding the landscaping. We have quite a bit of landscaping on the property. I think we took a lot of diligence in looking at the adjacent properties, offering the screening with that. I think there was a comment to have a little bit more, so I think we can certainly fit in a little bit more. So any of the comments that we were able to look through that staff had brought up, which are very good comments between both the engineering and planning, are very easily incorporated into the plan that you have in front of you. So we feel very confident about it, and feel that anything that was brought up certainly can be incorporated. We'd be able to address those as we continue to move on with the project.
Questions for the applicant? Actually, I have a question that's probably more suitable for staff, but since you're up, I'll sort of pose it. No, I'll pose it to
Sure.
both of you. Actually, the sort of what I could see from the site plan indicates that, as you say, that the provisioning center is intended to be located at the back of the lot and the hotel at the front. Are these two somehow paired so that if the hotel doesn't, or if the provisioning center could be built without the hotel, or vice versa?
I think the intent is to build them both. Be very frank about it, is I think probably as the previous applicant had brought up, and probably is facing a little bit more, and they brought up is cost value of land.
Sure.
And so what we want to do is to maximize what we can with what we have. And a market analysis was done regarding hotel, and it fits very well within this location. We have another hotel that's right across the street. It's still a growing area, and a market analysis supports that. So the intent really is to develop it in totality. If we looked at a staging and phasing type of situation, we always tend to like to work from the back out. So we'd start in the rear with the provisioning, which is a smaller building. It would go up a little bit easier, and then continue to work out with that. So does that answer your question?
Sure. I was just
Thank you.
thinking that in addition to the provisioning center being currently sited at the back of the lot, the hotel would also help to screen that. Not again that
Absolutely.
the building itself is going to be.
Nope.
I guess I'll leave subjective comments out, right? So that,
Sure.
that ideally it's going to be something that you wouldn't want to hide, but it would
No.
be something that potentially could be
I think,
obscured.
and especially if you look at the property, so one of the things that we started when we come to planning and development is we have to be able to look at the property and say, how do we best utilize this piece of property? If you look and you see, it's a little bit narrower along the front, and then it opens up in the back. And so that lends itself well to positioning the building back there as well. And that also then offers us the opportunity to have much more open space. I think when you look at the staff's review, we're well beyond the requirement, or I should say, well within the requirement of the open space requirements. So that's one of the features that we look at. The property tends to dictate a little bit about how you position things. We did that, but then it also offers us the opportunity to offer the enhancement. So leaving that open space and then being able to landscape buffer those remaining open spaces is one of those things that we look at during development.
Other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Cahill.
Rezoning's not before us tonight, but the provisioning center can't be put there unless you do give rezoning to B2. But the surrounding area for quite some ways around is B4 and B5. What would be the rationale for that little area here to be made B2 instead of B4?
Right. So I think, and I don't want to speak for staff, but I do think that there's been another provisioning center that's been on the agenda or been approved in that vicinity as well, which actually is in the B4 district. So provisioning center could operate within that B4 district. I think when we looked at it, we are also working on a very similar project on Park Lake and Merritt as well. That is a multi-purpose type of use there that was situated within a B2 district, and we felt that that would probably be an appropriate use for that piece of property.
Okay. I was thinking B4 would not allow it, but I guess it's the RA that wouldn't allow it, the current zoning.
I believe for the provisioning centers, since it's an overlay district, they would be allowed there regardless of zoning, because the overlay approval in that ordinance established that as a set zone for the provisioning centers. The thing that stands out without having the code in front of me is the B2 zoning allows the height for the hotel to be as high as it is with the special use permit, which is why I think it would be appropriate for that zoning based on the application here, and also the use would match what's in the future land use plan, if I'm correct.
That is correct, but also the retail suite that's non-medical marijuana related would also require a B2 type.
Yes, there's no retail allowed in the B4 district, so it would have to resubmit the plans saying office instead of retail if it were a B4 district. And I think that's
Okay.
why B2 would be the
I guess I don't understand the retail aspect of that. What is that supposed to be then?
At this point, there's nothing that's planned. I think, again, when we look at an opportunity for development, we're trying to keep as much flexibility as possible. So when we put together in the floor plans, I think you have those in front of you, we don't have anything planned right now, but looking at this as a multi-purpose type development offers us that opportunity to be able to look at a potential user or retail in the future. So no plans as of yet, but as projects continue, I think obviously you guys have seen this through the city, multi-purpose projects are very prevalent right now between different uses. And so having that flexibility would be very critical to us to be able to market that and then as part of the whole overall development.
Okay. Well, I thought the B2 was because of the marijuana.
No.
You needed that.
No.
It doesn't, but then I guess my next question would be, why do you need the B2 for this little retail operation when there's nothing else like it anywhere near?
Well, I think when we're looking at the development, and again, I think as mentioned, staff is the hotel use is critical for the B2 zoning district. There also is a height provision within the B2 that would allow us to go up. I think it actually goes up to 6 stories, 60 some feet, but we're not proposing that. So that B2 zoning is critical for us as far as the hotel use as well.
Okay, there is the reason I thought that the hotel was not the issue was there's a Holiday Inn Express on the road. How tall is that?
I don't know about that. That's what kitty corner from this property that we're talking about here. Anywhere between 3 to 4 stories. It's very typical. Anything 3 to 4 stories with the hotels.
Okay, but that apparently was built without going to B2 then.
Have to take a look.
I don't know the history on that, but just like anything else, things evolve.
It's B4, hotels are permitted as a principal use.
So you don't need B2 here?
For a hotel, for any general retail establishment, you would need a commercial district other than B4. B2.
Which is the marijuana and the retail.
So they're proposing a a medical marijuana provisioning center and then also a retail suite for general retail, non-medical marijuana related.
Yes.
That's what they're proposing here. So that would have to have B2 or potentially B5 or some other B district that would allow retail generally.
Right.
They couldn't accomplish that in B4 or the current zoning district.
I thought I was just told you didn't need the B2 for the marijuana.
Correct, that's correct. But for the general retail,
General
you do.
retail.
Not to say that that's what will happen or that's what they'll get, but that's what they're after.
I see.
So
Okay.
they have three things that they're trying, and they all have
That's
different ways of accomplishing them, so it is a little bit complicated from that perspective.
So if it was just a marijuana provisioning center without this added retail element, you wouldn't need B2.
Correct, you could just do it with B4, and that would fit.
I see. Okay.
In any case, these are questions that are for the application that's not in front of us tonight. These are really more related to, I'm not trying to, I
understand.
No, and I exactly hear what you're saying, but I'm mindful of the time. And if we could keep the discussion based, your very legitimate concerns about the sort of lacking items on the application are, I'm in 100% agreement with. But if we could move off of discussion regarding zoning for now, and we'll come back to that soon enough, I hope. Any other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, real quick.
Absolutely, sorry, Commissioner Sullivan.
Do you have a specific hotel locked up
Right.
already?
Yes. So that's a very good question. So we have a market analysis that's been conducted. It's a general market analysis that says how, it takes a look at the general area, says, number one, can a hotel be supported within this area? And the answer comes back yes. And then it looks a little bit in more depth as to about how many rooms and so on. So it usually gives you a range about that. We're in the process right now of securing what we call a flag, that franchise. So at this point, we don't have the exact one locked up, but we're in process for that. So the market is there. That's kind of the first step to make sure that it's there. Then we go out and seek that flag, that brand approval. So we're right at that stage.
And then as a follow-up, I'm just struggling to envision what the retail component is supposed to be. You know, maybe not a specific company, but what's that use? What's that intended use? What do you envision? How is it going to all pair together?
I think when we looked at that, we looked at the opportunity for flexibility and having a different offering. Again, I don't want to come back too much to it, but price of land is very expensive, and so we're looking at what gives us the most opportunity to get a return as well on this. We know the hotel is good. We know the market study. We know the provisioning center is an authorized use. We looked at another complementary use that would be that would service that overall development, and that retail really kind of comes back to it. We're seeing is, again, I say this, we're working on multiple different projects in different locations. One of them in the city, in different locations, and we see that multiple component of different uses wanting to come together. So we looked at that opportunity here. Specifically, I can't tell you exactly what that is. I don't know. It's more speculative. It's like if any other developer came in and said they wanted to build a retail building. You don't really have users at that point, but you feel very strongly that you could do it based on the market. So we felt that offered us probably the best flexibility for the overall development there.
Any other questions for the applicant? Sorry. Commissioner Cahill?
Are we discussing the lot split at the same
No.
time here? Or?
No,
Okay.
but we will soon enough.
All right.
Thank you.
Then I'll save it.
Thanks for asking. Mr. Haywood?
Just a quick question about the provisioning center applicant, Thanos LLC. Are they pre-qualified? Will we see that information?
Nicholas Calkins, I'm an attorney for the applicant. Thanos is a single-member LLC. They have yet to gain pre-qualification status. The way that the state application works is it goes through various phases, and we are currently at the last and final phase. So we feel very strongly, based on communications with the State Department, that we will gain pre-qualification approval and within a very short time frame.
I would recommend, along the same lines of the conversation we've had before, that we probably shouldn't come back until we at least receive that information. I'm just going to put that out there.
And the two other, Commissioner Cahill.
Okay. I do have a question on this that's related to the lot split, in that, and as it would apply to the back lot, which would be the marijuana retail part of this, you're asking for a lot split, so that would separate the back lot where the marijuana provisioning center is from the frontage on West Road. And to get a special use permit, it's required that the proposed use shall be located with direct access to and frontage on a major street as designated in the major street plan, or within an area designated for adaptive reuse in the city center element of the comprehensive plan. So if you got this lot split, you no longer qualify for a special use the way I read this. So that's the question I'm asking.
I don't know if you have an answer to that. But I don't recall there was a similar project where this very issue had come up. I want to say that it was, on Coleman Road. It was on another major street where I asked a similar question where I don't think it was an easement there, but they had they used a shared driveway. It was in this very area. I want to say maybe was there not a, it was a vaguely medical building, maybe you remember it, and I don't know, ultimately staff could probably answer this better, but my recollection was that I was told at that time that it would still suffice. Whether it still does in this case or not, ultimately I think it's for staff to say. Perhaps I spoke prematurely and would prefer to, actually, maybe I should just defer to the experts on this one. Just a second, Vice Chair.
Yeah, it says the parking lots are shared. So I'm not quite sure what that does with the lot split. On page 2 of the staff report, it says the parking lots are shared. So if the parking lots are shared, then they do, the building doesn't have frontage, but part of the parking lot they're using has frontage on a major road. And I'm not quite sure how the sharing of the parking lots is going to work out, but I guess that's not for us to decide.
That's a good question about the shared use issue. We'll have to noodle on that one, perhaps bring our city council in to see if
Sure.
we can help us
If I
answer
could, Mr. Haywood, as well as we've identified a dedicated ingress-egress easement that would be for the benefit of both properties. Just like anything else, if we look to develop it, this project, and if it was any other project, you would do it the exact same way. You would have single-point access, because we want to limit the number of curb cuts that we have out and the access points that we have out to the roadway. And the best way of doing that is to have a shared drive, shared access, and cross-access agreements. So we've identified on the plans, and I believe within the description that we had as part of the lot split, a dedicated ingress-egress easement between the parcels that will allow for cross-access, and there is also a cross-access parking agreement that would be in place between the two properties. So you essentially are trying to limit the number of curb cuts, and the best way to do that is to have a shared drive, shared access, shared responsibility as well when it comes to ingress and egress as well as the parking.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cahill.
Yeah, I understand that. The problem I'm having is that it's a two-pointed requirement. It's direct access to and frontage on the major street. So if the marijuana was in the front part of that lot, it would have frontage. But if you split it off, or if it was, I suppose you could say if it was just one development, it had frontage. But when you split it off, you don't have frontage anymore.
I think, as Mr. Haywood brought up, I think we'd be happy to just explore that a little bit deeper as to how that works as far as the lot split and that means for ingress and egress and how that goes. I have no issue with exploring that further with him.
Okay.
That's a fair point. Other questions for the applicant? Okay, then at this time, I'd like to open up the public hearing for this particular project. If there's any members of the public who would like to make a comment on the site plan and special use permit, with the understanding that we'll be looking at the lot split momentarily, please come forward.
Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about the lot split.
Thank you. Ms. Drager?
Alice
Run a
Drager,
tight ship.
621 Sunset Lane. I hate to even take your time when I'm worried about you all swimming home while you're tired. Maybe I'm just getting cynical, but 2 points of information I wanted to share with you as I'm sitting here listening. One is the young man who spoke on the hub earlier. I looked up his name and address, and it turns out he belongs to one of the fraternities that would be demolished if the hub project happened. And I asked him why he didn't mention that, and he said that the president of the fraternity was standing next to him, and it was important to them to keep that separate. But I am getting cynical. So the Kodiak Landark folks, whose name also appears on this application, are basically, I think, land speculators. They have the absolute right to do that, of course, but they are buying the property for $1 million, advertising it for $12 million, told us there was a Holiday Inn Express, told us there were specific things, and now they're basically advertising the land as, here we have all these approvals, and so now it's worth more. So basically what you're being asked to do is drive up the price of the land. Again, it's their right to ask you to do this, but what is irritating me is that your time and my time and the time of the people is being wasted because you're dealing with an application that's utterly incomplete. And as I read the zoning code, you don't have to be doing this. The planning staff does not have to move to a public hearing and does not have to introduce SUPs if they don't have the material. And we should just stop doing it. It disturbed me that on the Royal Vlahakis plan, you all voted, I thought, appropriately saying that the plan was incomplete. But it worries me when the Planning Commission votes on a plan that is incomplete. It seems to me if you have to vote on a plan that is incomplete, you can't vote. And you're being asked to do that. And the staff is being asked to push this stuff along. I don't know who's asking them to push it along, but it doesn't seem fair to me, the staff, to be pushing them to bring these things forward when they end up having to come to 3 and 4 and 5 Planning Commission meetings for stuff we were supposed to have at the beginning. So I would say let's follow the zoning code and have this stuff brought before us appropriately. What's happening in this town is what I have taken to calling development by attrition. It is stuff dribbles out and dribbles out and dribbles out. It's very difficult for the public to know at what point they should pay attention and at what point they should comment. I don't know when to report. I don't know when to alert my neighborhood to stuff that affects us directly. Everybody's just exhausted because we get this dribble and drab as we go through all of these planning things, and the public simply doesn't know when to pay it. When is the point at which they're looking at something that's the real plan? And they feel, I think, understandably, like they're always too soon or too late. There's never a point where it makes sense. So I would encourage us to try to get away from this pattern we've developed of doing development by attrition, where basically a developer who's simply willing to come 1,000 times wins because we're all too freaking tired to deal with it anymore. I totally relate to what you're going through. What you're going through is extraordinary, so I will shut up. But that is my thoughts. Could we just follow the zoning code and ask for the materials and refuse to hear stuff until we have it, and that way everybody can participate appropriately?
Questions for Ms. Drager?
Don't bother.
All right, thank you. Excellent input. Any other members of the public that would like to make a comment on this application? I invite you to come forward now. I'm seeing no one, so we'll close the public hearing, return this back to council, back to the commission, excuse me. Any directives for staff in addition to the sort of missing pieces that we've already identified? All right, then we will move on. Thank you. To item 6C. This is a lot split. The greatly anticipated lot split. A public hearing will be held to consider a lot split application from 3225 West Road LLC for the property located at 3225 West Road to create 2 parcels from the existing 4.5 acre property. Mr. Parcell, welcome back.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I'd like to alert you all to new state law. I put this in the summary comments. It is required from House Bill 4055 that property owners obtain a certificate from the county clerk that shows all property taxes and special assessments due on the parcel and tract that is subject to the split have been paid for the past 5 years. This will be now added as a standard condition of approval for a lot split to abide by that, and we have reached out to the applicant once we were notified by the city assessor to gather this information as well. The lot split, both the new lots created will meet all of the zoning code compliance. There's a little bit of funky things in the section 1 on page 2 between the existing lot depth and standards, because one lot will be irregularly shaped, kind of up and down rectangles. This means that in the land division regulation compliance, it's about 30 feet over the 2.5 to 1 ratio there, just to alert you to that. Additionally, as Commissioner Boyle mentioned, the parking, the shared parking, in the application and the overall plans, they break down the parking as required by code for each individual parcel, and that meets what code requires. And then the overall lot split, as Commissioner Cahill was starting to wonder why it wasn't one development, the new split lot is 550 feet away from the provisioning center lot on 3318, 3332 West Coolidge, that new lot that was created that has already been approved. That lot split makes this in compliance with the code for the separation as needed for provisioning centers. If it was one development and the lot split didn't occur, then it would be within 500 feet, making it unable to be approved.
So ultimately, Commissioner Cahill's question is, does the easement count as frontage, right? And I think that ultimately that's the question that gets posed to Mr. Yaden or whomever, council, that indeed they have access. Does that easement count as frontage? You make a good point about sort of separation, but there's nothing that says that there has to be a provisioning center on this particular plot, right? So that's just,
yes, alerting you
But
to
if you want one, you've got to put it where it's being proposed.
To the measurement distances between the already approved and in the process of being constructed center.
Oops, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
Oh, no, I'll be more than happy to dig into if the easement counts as frontage.
Commissioner Cahill.
I was just going to say, I forget who raised it, whether it was building or engineering, but they were saying the plans had the wrong dimensions on them. Nobody knows what I'm talking about?
I thought I saw that on another.
On the lot split or on the building?
Well, I can't remember which one of
So it
these
must have
it
been
was
something
on, but they were talking about,
engineering.
it was stating, the plans were saying it was 300 feet, but it's really only 200 feet
Scaled
or
at that, and
something
it's also
like
scaled
that.
at
Yeah.
Yeah, so that must have been presumably 6B.
So I was just bringing it up that I'd want things analyzed with correct measurements for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Not unfair. Any other questions for Mr. Parcell? Once again, I'll invite the applicant to come forward if you have any, or if you're already forward, if you've got anything else you'd like to add to this.
I'll just add real quickly, yeah, we definitely would make sure we have title work for the property. We'll make sure that everything is represented by the deed and is there. And it was by the engineering department, you're absolutely correct, that brought that up. Sometimes you can scale it and rely upon it, but what will be represented will be based on the deed. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant regarding the lot split? Seeing that we have no questions, I'll open the public hearing for this application and invite members of the public to come forward. If you have questions or comments you'd like to make about item 6C, now would be the time to come forward. Seeing no one come forward, we'll close the public hearing and return this back to the commission. Any other directives for staff or for the applicant regarding the lot split? All right, so we will see this again. I guess I would like to ask that we see it in a tidy package that's got all the ducks in their appropriate locations. That moves us on to item 6D. Ordinance 1468. This is a public hearing will be held to consider ordinance 1468, an ordinance to amend the use district map of the City of East Lansing by rezoning the properties at 710, 722, and 722.5 Grove Street from R2 Medium Density Single Family Residential District to RM 32 Single Center, City Center Multiple Family Residential District. Mr. Parcell.
Hello again.
Hello.
So this is a rezoning application that is tied to the sorority or Class B multifamily development that will be taking place on 710 and 722 Grove Street that we spoke about 2 weeks ago. This is proposing to rezone it from its existing use at R2, which is single family residential, to RM 32, the City Center Multiple Family Residential. It is a more intensive land use as indicated by the table in the staff report. However, this also matches the zoning of the properties that are to the east of the subject properties, which is also RM 32, including several uses for sorority houses. And as always, I would like for this project to qualify all statements that this is for a Class B multifamily use, which is a sorority house, but it may also be a fraternity or a boarding house or some sort like that, just for getting the definition out there correctly.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions for Mr. Parcell? All right, and I see that the applicant is here. Do you have anything to add? It's pretty straightforward, no? All right. I do have one card regarding this, so I'll open up the public hearing and invite Ms. Stewart, Deborah Ann Stewart. Yeah, absolutely.
Good evening, Commission.
Thanks for your patience.
I want to thank you for your time and your talent and tenacity. My father was a member of the Commission back in the 80s, and I do appreciate your attention to detail. I'm here this evening because I've been a resident for 57 years on Grove Street. Many changes, as you're aware. I do like to just take 1 minute to use the 600 block of Grove as a case study. We're wonderfully balanced. We have 3 young families with children. We have a professor. We have a young professional like myself. We had 2 90-year-olds who were living in their own homes and 3 student housing centers. We had balance. I come to you this evening because out of concern of how that will affect the balance of the neighborhood. The house, which is being for your consideration of rezoning, has always gone up for sale quickly by family members in the area. It's just 2 blocks from the high school, 1 block from Hannah Center, and a nice walk of 1 block to the library, which our families on our block all utilize at different ages and different stages of their life. I have great concerns about how it will affect the balance. I know you're concerned also about vehicles and how somehow the car has taken over East Lansing. I walk to work, but there are areas of Bircham Road which are impassable by car at certain times of the day. Adding 40 people, 50 people to the neighborhood and vehicles to that location, I can't understand what the benefit would be to the current residents and taxpayers for over a 50-year period. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions for Ms. Stewart? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other members of the public that would like to come forward and make a comment on this? I presume you were the professor.
I don't know, maybe. But Deb is my neighbor, she lives across the street, and we used to live in the house that they lived in. Anyway, I was here on August 14th, and I just spoke about the building massing, and so I did submit a letter there, but just want to reiterate that I thought that Joe and Studio Intrigue Paige were very responsive, so I met Paige and I walked the neighborhood, we looked at the different sororities in the area, and so any of the concerns I had about the physical building massing, which was my principal concern, I don't have anymore. I think they worked hard to kind of tone down the scale of the building, so I support the changes that they've made.
And so that actually ties in both with this particular portion of the ordinance is the rezoning, but we'll ultimately see the site plan and special use permit in a short period of time. So that's actually just
That's a
another
special
item.
use permit thing, I
Exactly.
think, yeah.
But that's,
right.
that's a
Mhm.
couple of items down on our agenda
Yeah,
still.
okay,
but
all right.
They're
Oh, I'm sorry,
related.
okay.
Thank you. No, no
I
worries.
just merged them all into one,
That's
but, all
fine.
right, yes.
You're in favor of the rezoning, I take it from your remarks, or?
To me, I think a sorority seems an appropriate use for that site, just based on the number of sororities and fraternities that we have in the area. So I think I'm not opposed to that. Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other members of the public that would like to make a comment on this application? I'm not seeing anyone else come forward, so we'll close the public hearing on item 6D and return this to the commission. Let's be mindful that, since Mr. Marzowski had mentioned it, and I followed up with it again, that ultimately we're going to take a look at this as an old business item as regards the actual site plan and special use permit. Probably ought to give some consideration as to how that gets handled with putting both of these applications to council. If perhaps the site plan and special use permit should be held until the council sees the rezoning. So it's just a thought. Any directives to staff or to the applicant, I guess, regarding specifically regarding the rezoning? Okay, then we will see that presumably at our next meeting. All right, that brings us on to item 6E, Commissioner Cahill.
I guess I do have one question. Across the street is a fraternity, but that's the same zoning as currently. Is that because it's grandfathered in or something, or is it allowed in that?
I don't know if they have a special use permit or not. I don't know what the status of that is. It is quite small, though.
Right.
Not that that matters. Let me see what the.
That's R2, yeah.
Yeah, a fraternity wouldn't be allowed in R2 unless it was grandfathered.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so maybe it was grandfathered.
It would have to be.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that'll bring us on to item 6E. This is ordinance 1469. A public hearing will be held to consider ordinance 1469, an ordinance to allow for and regulate adult use marijuana establishments. Mr. Haywood.
Thank you. I had some notes here earlier. I have misplaced them. Okay. Let me get to the staff report. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background about how we got here. In November of 2018, the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act was approved by Michigan voters and became effective in December of that year, which allowed the use of marijuana by adults 21 years of age or older. It also set out the requirement for the state to establish rules for the regulation of those facilities that might come with it by within I think 12 months. So in July of 2019, those rules were established as emergency rules to regulate the licensing of facilities related to adult use marijuana. So the rules have been released, and they allow for, they're structured very similarly to medical marijuana rules. However, they do allow for some different types of facilities. So it's in the sense that they require and provide for background checks, pre-qualification, marijuana establishment plans, reporting, product testing and tracking, et cetera. So those are all very similar. The differences appear to be in the type of uses that are permitted. In general, they follow the same categories such as growing, processing, secure transport, testing. and retail. But they do allow for some new uses associated. So one new one is a micro business, which allows to combine growing, processing, and one other aspect of it on the same site. They just can't sell to other facilities if they do that. So it's kind of like a contained type of use. And then they also allow for designated consumption licenses. So there would be some facilities, not unlike a bar or restaurant, where you can consume the product. And then also excess marijuana grower licenses, which you can hold 5 Class C growers licenses. That would be up to 10,000 plants. So that'd be quite a large facility. And then you can have you can be an event organizer for temporary events. So not unlike festivals or other events where restaurants do during festivals or other things, they can have a temporary location somewhere that would be authorized by the municipality for up to 7 days. So the draft that staff put together was really generated by the city attorney, and it proposes none of those new facility types. So it follows the medical marijuana ordinance that we have in place already to a T. It has the same locations under the same overlay districts, and you can only establish a adult use marijuana establishment where a medical facility is already licensed and operating. So you have to have already been approved, granted a special use permit, and licensed by the state in order to start a retail adult use facility. So the ordinance was generated more for the perspective that we knew that it likely was council's intent to opt in. I mean, I think they've made that clear. And we actually, by the rules of the state, you either opt in or you opt out. There is no, there is an option for doing nothing, but that automatically opts you in, and then you are unregulated at that point. So it would be very difficult to put constraints on or regulate facilities without direction under the code. The state licensing agency is expecting to start accepting state-level license applications in November. So that's kind of why we're here, to start talking about this, to get ahead of that curve. So I guess with that, I think I touched on all the major points that I wanted to, and we can kind of open it up for discussion.
Any questions for Mr. Haywood? Vice Chair Boyle?
I might have misunderstood you, but did you say that in order, I'm going to call them recreational marijuana dispensaries, excuse me, but that's what I'm going to call them.
Yeah.
In order to operate a recreational marijuana dispensary, you have to be located in a location that has been approved as a medical marijuana dispensary?
Yes.
Or did I misunderstand you?
That's correct. Yeah, because the state law has a really funny provision in it where it says that if the local municipality has granted approval for a medical facility, you have to also allow for the adult use recreational facility also. So you don't have a choice really at that point. The only way to break that tie would be to opt out.
Okay.
So if we opt in, we have to automatically allow, so that's our starting point.
So when you say location, you don't mean the physical building, you mean one of the overlay zones?
No, I mean the physical location.
So
the
if
facility.
one of the ones we've approved never actually opens, okay? So it never operates, then there's a loss of that marijuana dispensary.
Yeah, they
And
wouldn't-
another person can't come in and open one there?
Well, somebody else could buy that out if an SUP's been granted for for a location, and let's say whoever was intending to be licensed at that location
Decides they don't want to do it.
decide they want to do it in another location, don't do it for whatever reason, somebody else could come in, get a license from the state, and operate under the special use permit, provided they meet all the other parameters of the site plan and the special use permit requirements.
And that the special use permit hadn't expired.
Correct.
Are we anticipating that the buildings that, or the dispensaries that are already approved are going to become recreational dispensaries? I mean, that would make sense to me.
I would make that assumption that that would be a natural
It'd be a lot
progression.
easier not to have to be checking all those cards.
Yeah.
Other questions for Mr. Haywood? I just wanted to clarify that the 4 specialty licenses that the state has, what's the word, permitted, allowed, enabled? We're not going to, we're not.
This
allowing
ordinance
provision
does
for
not
currently
not include allowance for those.
Okay, so that actually gets rid of a couple of other questions that I had then. Thank you. Other, Commissioner Sullivan?
Yeah, so a little bit technical. I think the language that's before us might be a little bit overly specific, being that it names both the name of the State Department and the act that it's regulated under. And let me give you an example. When there's an administration change, they typically go through and they change the name of a few different departments, which the current governor did to several departments when she took office. So
Yeah.
I think you could just say regulated under the state of Michigan pursuant to this act rather than that specific department. And
Yeah, I think.
Snyder changed the name of this department to the current name,
I
just to
think
give
we
you an
actually
example.
noticed that.
So.
I forgot to mention it in the staff report that we would need. There may be some other things that we need to change throughout the ordinance to be in compliance. We'll look at that.
Any other questions for Mr. Haywood? All right, then I will open this up to the public. If there's any members of the public who wish to make a comment on item 6E, I would invite you to come forward now. And seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing, and I guess we'll return it back to commission, but we just got done with that. Any other directives or questions for Mr. Haywood or staff? All right. That'll move us on to into old business, item 7A. This is a site plan and special use permit application from GTW Investment Properties LLC for the properties at 710, 722, 722 and a half Grove Street to demolish the existing structures and construct a 3-story building for a sorority, it says, but we're reminded that it is a Class B rental property. But please, Mr. Parcell.
Yes. Hello again. So I responded to all of the commissioner comments that I believed were brought up during the August 14th meeting at the end of the staff report. This addresses rental statuses, parking allowances, violations and issues with the nearby Class B multifamily rental uses, and some of the site plan issues that were brought up based on the public hearing. I would like to really commend the applicant, the architects, and the public for getting together and working on this one to submit you the revised plans for this meeting. I think that they sufficiently addressed just about everything you wanted to see on the south frontage. They changed the height, so it is still a 3-story building, but it is a little more recessed, so it looks a little less imposing on the street. This matches, if you can see in my comment for number 7, a lot of the other sororities in the city. I was asked to find other 3-story sororities in the city. There's over 10 of them listed by address there. A lot of them up MAC, but a lot of them have the peaked windows and top, and they're not quite as tall or imposing as the first draft of this one was. There's the sidewalk shown going up Grove. There is no parking on that side of the street, only on the western portion of the street, I believe I was told by the city parking office. And based on what I have heard from police and searching through BSNA during the second round of follow-up with them, there have not really been any violations or issues regarding the nearby sororities or fraternities in the area or in the neighborhood. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Parcell? All right, thank you. See that the applicant is with us as well. If you have anything that you want to add? I would invite you forward, please.
Good evening. Joe Goodser, representing GTW. I've been in front of you before, and I think that we have addressed all your concerns as has been pointed out. I do want to share one comment so everyone is aware. We've owned the house at 722 and 722 and a half Grove for probably 15 years now. And though there are local residents who live in the 600 block of Grove, 710 has always been used as a rental unit. It is now licensed as a rental unit because we took the time and went through that process. But I can assure you that because sometimes the smaller individuals rent without licenses, but it's been a rental property for quite some time. So I want to share that with you, and also share with you that it is a fraternity across the street, directly across from this location. So I'm here to answer any other questions you may have on this item.
Any questions for Mr.
Besides those
for the
comments.
applicant? Questions, comments? Commissioner Cahill.
I don't have any questions. I'd just like to thank you for the work you put in revising this. And it's great to see a citizen came up with thoughts that were really helpful to us, and you looked at it and adapted your project to what I think is a beautiful project.
Well, as I said at the last meeting, I think that sometimes it takes a collaboration of people and good ideas to come up with the best possible solution and the best ideas. So Tim Morowski is very well respected in the architecture community, and so we took his comments to heart and met with him and made the appropriate adjustments.
I love it when it works like that.
Yep.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Yeah, just in particular, the south side of the building is a significant improvement upon the last design, so I want to thank you for that.
I mean, I'll echo those comments, and it's not a question, but by way of providing, there was a letter from Mr. Mrozowski, in as much as we don't have public input at this point in the meeting, but he was complimentary of both you and Ms. Spagnuolo regarding your sort of willingness to consider new ideas and make modifications as necessary to make it into, I think they've done a masterful job as well of bringing the scale down, but hopefully it doesn't significantly impact the bed count and the sort of capacity of the building.
It.
Exactly.
And it really, the south side was a great suggestion on his part and made the project, I think, aesthetically much more appealing.
Sure. Okay, any other questions for the applicant or comments? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
That brings that back to the commission then. Motion would be in order. Mr. Downs.
I'll move in the matter of the request from GTW Investment Properties for a special use permit designating a sorority at the properties of 710, 722, and 722 and a half Grove Street. This is a motion to recommend approval to the City Council for special use permit subject to the 14 conditions cited in the September 6, 2019 staff report.
There's a motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. There's been moved by Commissioner Downs and seconded by Commissioner Cahill to recommend approval to City Council. Is there any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Cahill.
I do have one question, whether we should add a condition 15 that RM32 zoning be approved. Is that necessary, or?
That's actually, that was my sort of sidebar there, so sorry about that.
Okay.
Yep.
Misunderstood your
Okay.
question. No, that's appropriate.
Okay. Would you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I second again.
Okay. Very well. Is there any other additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to recommend approval to City Council, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. That'll move us on to item 8. Oh, of course.
Everyone's mind. I think I shared this and I forgot to share it tonight, is that there's a current sorority that occupies 3 buildings on MAC, and they're dying for their own home.
Wow.
So I think there's appropriate places for sororities, and I think there's appropriate places for fraternities. And this is an appropriate place based on the neighborhood for a sorority. They're planning on signing a long-term lease, and when I mean long-term, we're talking 20 to 25 years. So I think the community needs to know, if it's ever asked, that this is going to be a long-term tenant with a sorority that has been dying to have a house for quite some time.
Great.
So I thought that should be pointed out, that it is going to be a sorority.
Sure, well done.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We have no new business. Item 9 is commissioner concerns. Vice Chair Boyle.
Just briefly, I know it's been a long night. I do think that the information provided, particularly regarding the proposals for the new 2 hub buildings, underlines the importance of the city either participating in a housing analysis study or doing one on their own if they can't get the acts of Meridian Township and the city of Lansing together. I think it's very important, before we add over 1,000 new occupancies along Bogue Street, to determine whether or not those are needed, and also what impact they may have on our existing housing. So I can't stress enough that I think a study would be warranted at this point, and hopefully it could be concluded in a reasonable amount of time. In addition, I guess, I've heard comments from at least one council member that perhaps if we overbuild housing, or if we build a lot of additional housing, that some of our existing homes, former owner-occupied, will become owner-occupied again.
Detached.
And I'm going to say that I just think that that is not a reason to allow a large amount of additional housing, and I don't think it's going to work that way. And I would point out that there still appear to me, talking to students, people who want to live in a house in a neighborhood. And they're still going to rent those houses that were formerly owner-occupied, and they're going to rent them as students, and the ones that are non-conforming are going to have more than a family or 2 unrelated people in them. In addition, some of the houses that are currently licensed for rental are never going to become owner-occupied again. They're tiny little 1950s houses with 1 bathroom and 2 or 3 bedrooms. And they're not going to become owner-occupied. Those are not selling even in a hot housing market. People want 2 bathrooms, they want bigger rooms that are in those little 1950s houses, even the ones that were beautifully built and are very nicely maintained, which not necessarily all those were. So I think the impact on our existing housing that we do need to be concerned about is if the market for housing becomes so soft that rents do go down to the point that the landlords with the older buildings can't keep them up. So yeah, I think that's a concern. I think we need to be considering that. And I want the city of East Lansing to have housing for students. I'm a little shocked at what students are paying right now, apparently. But I do want the city of East Lansing to have housing for students. It adds to our community to have the students living here. But I don't think we have to oversupply it, and I certainly don't want to support development to the extent that it hurts the city as a whole, and I think that could happen.
That young man from Cedar Village was certainly impressive.
He was very eloquent, was he not?
Yeah.
I think he did a great job. He was a political science major, probably.
I was thinking the same thing.
I was wondering.
Wondering when he'd be running for office.
I was a political science major.
Okay, and you're very eloquent, too. Any other concerns? Motion, oops, I'm sorry.
Just the one, and I spoke about it before, and I have in the past, but I really think we need more of a filter on how things get on the agenda as far as being complete applications, because we end up twisting in knots when we have something before us that's not really complete. and it requires an enormous amount of effort trying to work our way through it. That's really something I think the applicant needs to do before it gets to us.
Just say no.
Yeah. Say, when you have this, then we'll put you on the agenda.
Any other concerns? Good point. All right, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Second.
Been moved by Commissioner Downs and seconded by Commissioner Sullivan. All those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed. We are adjourned at 9:51.